She hated him with every fibre of her being. The Duke of Ashbourne was everything she despised. Cold, arrogant, untouchable. But when their ship shattered against the rocks and the forest swallowed them whole, hatred became the least dangerous thing between them. Because in the wilderness, with only each other to rely on, she discovered something far more terrifying than his cruelty. The man beneath the mask, and the way her heart betrayed her every time his eyes found hers in the firelight. If you're ready for a tale of enemies forced together, of survival and slow-burning desire, stay with me. Subscribe and comment where you're listening from. Let's begin this journey together. The sky had been screaming warnings all morning, but no one listened. Lady Evelyn Hartley stood at the ship's railing, her gloved hands gripping the cold iron as the vessel pitched violently beneath her feet. The Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and churning, the color of old bruises. Rain lashed her face, soaking through the wool of her traveling cloak, but she didn't retreat to the cabin. She couldn't. Not when he was down there, the Duke of Ashbourne. Even his name tasted bitter on her tongue. She'd spent the last 3 days avoiding him. No small feat on a merchant ship bound for the colonies. But the man had a way of occupying space, of making every room feel smaller, every conversation feel like a battlefield. His presence was suffocating, deliberate. As if he knew exactly how much he unsettled her, and took pleasure in it. The ship lurched again, harder this time, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. The sailors shouted to each other in voices swallowed by the wind, their movements frantic as they scrambled to secure the sails. One of them, a young man with sun-weathered skin, glanced her way, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to fear. "My lady, you need to get below deck," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. Evelyn nodded, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot. There was something hypnotic about the chaos, the way the ocean rose and fell like a living thing, hungry and relentless. She'd always loved the sea. Her father had taken her sailing when she was a girl, before the fever took him, before everything fell apart, before men like the Duke of Ashbourne decided her fate without asking. A wave crashed over the side of the ship, drenching her completely. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from her lungs. She gasped, stumbling backward, and strong hands caught her before she could fall. "Are you trying to get yourself killed, Miss Hartley?" His voice, low and sharp, cutting through the storm like a blade. Evelyn wrenched herself free, spinning to face him. The Duke stood there, impossibly composed, despite the rain pouring down his face, his dark coat plastered to his broad shoulders. His hair, usually so meticulously styled, hung in wet strands across his forehead, softening the harsh angles of his face. But his eyes, those cold slate-grey eyes, held no softness. They never did. "I don't recall asking for your assistance, Your Grace," she said, her voice icy despite the tremor in her hands. "And I don't recall offering it out of kindness," he replied smoothly. "But if you drown, I'll be the one blamed for not preventing it. So do us both a favor and get below deck before you do something foolish." Foolish. As if she were a child who needed managing. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to throw his condescension back in his perfectly aristocratic face, but another violent lurch of the ship sent them both staggering. This time, the deck tilted at an unnatural angle, and the sound that followed was something Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life, a low, grinding crack that seemed to come from the belly of the ship itself. The Duke's expression changed. Just for a moment, the mask slipped and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Alarm. No, more than that. Fear. "Move," he said, his voice no longer sharp, but urgent. His hand closed around her wrist, firm and unyielding, and he pulled her toward the stairs leading below deck. "What's happening?" she demanded, trying to keep her footing as the ship groaned beneath them. "We're taking on water," he said flatly. "The hull's been breached." The words didn't make sense at first, or maybe they did, but her mind refused to accept them. Ships didn't just sink. Not like this. Not in the middle of the Atlantic with no land in sight. They reached the narrow stairwell and the Duke pushed her ahead of him, his body a solid wall at her back, as they descended into the chaos below. The corridor was packed with passengers and crew, all shouting, all moving in different directions. A woman clutched a crying infant to her chest. A man shoved past them, his face white with panic. "Stay close to me," the Duke ordered, his hand still locked around her wrist. Evelyn wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his protection, But the ship lurched again, and this time the floor seemed to drop out from under her. She slammed into the wall, pain flaring in her shoulder, and suddenly the Duke's arm was around her waist, holding her upright. "We need to get to the lifeboats," he said, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him over the cacophony. "There are lifeboats," hope flared in her chest. "Not enough," he said grimly. "But we're getting on one." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but it only made her anger spark hotter. Of course he would get on a lifeboat. Men like him always survived, always landed on their feet while everyone else drowned. They fought their way back up to the deck, and the scene that greeted them was pure chaos. The ship was listing badly now, tilting so far to one side that the railing dipped into the churning water. Sailors were lowering the lifeboats, small fragile things that looked like they'd be swallowed whole by the waves. Passengers swarmed toward them, desperate and shoving. "There's no room," someone screamed. "Women and children first. Get back or I'll—" The Duke's hand tightened on Evelyn's waist, and he moved with brutal efficiency, cutting through the crowd like a knife. She hated that she let him, that she clung to his strength, even as she despised him for it. One of the lifeboats was already being lowered, overcrowded and dangerously unstable. Another was being prepared, sailors barking orders as passengers climbed in. The Duke steered her toward it, his jaw set, his movements precise. "Your Grace." A sailor blocked their path, his expression apologetic but firm. "There's no more space. We're over capacity as it is." The Duke's eyes went cold. "Make space." "Sir, I can't—" "I said make space." His voice dropped, quiet and lethal, and the sailor actually flinched. Evelyn pulled away from him, disgust churning in her stomach. "You can't just—" The ship gave another sickening lurch, and then the world exploded. A massive wave slammed into the starboard side, and the sound of splintering wood filled the air. Evelyn's feet left the deck, and for a moment she was weightless, suspended in the chaos. Then she hit the water. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath, her thoughts, her ability to scream. The ocean closed over her head, and she couldn't tell which way was up. Her heavy skirts dragged her down, the fabric tangling around her legs. She kicked, thrashed, her lungs burning, panic clawing at her throat, and then something grabbed her. Strong arms locked around her chest, hauling her upward. She broke the surface, gasping, choking on salt water. The Duke's face was inches from hers, his eyes fierce and blazing. "Don't fight me," he commanded. "Just breathe." She wanted to fight him, wanted to push him away and prove she didn't need him, but her body wouldn't obey. The cold was numbing everything, slowing her thoughts, making her limbs heavy and useless. The Duke kept one arm around her as he swam, powerful strokes that cut through the waves. She could feel the strain in his body, the way his breathing came harder, but he didn't stop. Didn't let go. "There," he shouted, and through the rain and spray she saw it, debris from the ship, a large section of wooden planking floating on the surface. He pushed her toward it, his hands on her waist, as he lifted her onto the makeshift raft. She collapsed onto it, coughing up seawater, her entire body shaking. A moment later, the Duke hauled himself up beside her, his chest heaving. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just lay there, clinging to the wreckage as the storm raged around them, as the ship, what was left of it, disappeared beneath the waves. Evelyn turned her head and found the Duke staring at her. His face was pale beneath the tan, his lips tinged blue, but his eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. "You saved me," she said, the words barely more than a whisper. His jaw tightened. "Don't read too much into it." And there it was. The coldness she knew so well, back in place like armor. Evelyn looked away toward the endless expanse of water. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain softening to a steady drizzle. But there was no sign of land, no sign of the other lifeboats, just the two of them, alone in the vastness of the Atlantic. "We're going to die out here," she said quietly. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, in that same flat, emotionless tone, he said, "Not if I have anything to say about it." Evelyn closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her under. The sound of waves woke her. Not the violent, crashing roar of the storm, but something gentler, a rhythmic shushing that reminded her of lullabies her mother used to sing. For a moment, Evelyn let herself drift in that half-conscious space between sleep and waking, where nothing hurt and the world made sense. Then reality crashed back in, the shipwreck, the cold, the Duke. Her eyes snapped open, and pain flooded her senses. Every muscle in her body ached, stiff and protesting. Her throat burned from the salt water she'd swallowed, and her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, a wave of dizziness forcing her back down. "Don't move too quickly." His voice. Of course. Evelyn turned her head, slowly this time, and found the Duke crouched a few feet away, his back to her as he worked at something she couldn't see. He'd shed his ruined coat, and his white shirt clung to him, still damp and streaked with sand. His dark hair was disheveled, no longer the picture of aristocratic perfection, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of exhaustion. She looked past him and realized with a jolt that they were no longer on the debris raft. They were on land. A beach stretched out in both directions, pale sand meeting dense, dark forest. The ocean rolled gently beyond, deceptively calm now, as if it hadn't tried to kill them hours ago. The sky overhead was overcast, but no longer threatening, the clouds a flat grey that gave no hint of the time of day. "How did we—" Her voice came out as a rasp, and she had to swallow, painfully, before trying again. "How did we get here?" "The current brought us in," the Duke said without turning around. His hands moved efficiently, snapping branches, arranging them in some pattern she couldn't decipher. "You were unconscious. I pulled you onto the shore around dawn." Unconscious. She'd been unconscious and he'd— what? Carried her? The thought made something uncomfortable twist in her chest. "Where are we?" she asked. "I don't know." He finally glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "An island, clearly. But whether it's inhabited or even on any map, I couldn't say. We drifted for hours." Evelyn forced herself to sit up, ignoring the protests from her body. Her dress was ruined, the pale blue fabric stained and torn, her skirts heavy with salt and sand. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins, hanging in tangled waves down her back. She probably looked like a drowned rat. The Duke, infuriatingly, still managed to look commanding despite everything. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching as he continued to work with the branches. "Building a fire? Or attempting to? The wood is damp, which makes it difficult." A fire. Of course, because they were stranded on an unknown island with no supplies, no shelter, and no guarantee of rescue. The reality of their situation settled over her like a cold blanket. "Do you even know how to build a fire?" The question came out more accusatory than she'd intended, but she was too tired and sore to care. His jaw tightened, the only sign that her words had landed. "I spent 2 years in the army, Miss Hartley. I'm not entirely useless in the wilderness." "You were in the army?" She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes," she said honestly. "You seem more suited to ballrooms than battlefields." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. Appearances can be deceiving. He struck 2 pieces of flint together, and a small spark caught in the dry moss he'd nested between the branches. He leaned down, blowing gently, coaxing the ember to life. After a moment, a thin trail of smoke began to rise, and then, finally, a small flame. Despite herself, Evelyn felt a flicker of relief. The Duke fed the fire carefully, adding small twigs first, then larger pieces as it grew stronger. The warmth was immediate and wonderful, cutting through the chill that had settled into her bones. She edged closer, holding her hands out toward the flames. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't respond, just continued tending the fire with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy. Evelyn watched him, studying the hard line of his profile, the way his hands moved with surprising gentleness despite their size. She'd never been this close to him for this long, never had the opportunity, or the misfortune, to observe him without the buffer of society's expectations. "Why do you hate me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. The Duke's hands stilled. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. "I don't hate you, Miss Hartley. You could have fooled me." Bitterness crept into her voice. "You've been nothing but cold and dismissive since the moment we met." His eyes, those impossible grey eyes, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've been indifferent. There's a difference." Indifferent. Somehow, that was worse. "Why?" she pressed. "What did I ever do to you?" "You existed," he said flatly. in a way that complicated my life. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. I didn't ask to complicate your life. I didn't ask for any of this. Neither did I. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. For the first time, she saw something crack in his carefully maintained facade, a glimpse of something that might have been genuine emotion. Your uncle, the Duke said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral again, made certain promises regarding your inheritance, promises that involved my cooperation. I didn't appreciate being maneuvered into a corner. Understanding dawned cold and sickening. The marriage contract. Among other things, Evelyn's uncle, her guardian since her father's death, had been trying to arrange a match for her for over a year. She'd refused every candidate and he'd grown increasingly desperate. The Duke of Ashbourne, with his title and fortune, would have been the crown jewel of potential suitors. I didn't know, she said quietly. I would never have agreed. It doesn't matter. The Duke stood abruptly, brushing sand from his trousers. The ship sank. The contract, along with all those other convenient arrangements, is at the bottom of the ocean. We have more immediate concerns. He was right, of course, but the revelation left her feeling hollowed out, exposed. He hadn't hated her. He'd resented being trapped, the same way she had. They'd both been pawns in someone else's game. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd escaped society's machinations, only to be trapped together in an entirely different way. We need to find fresh water, the Duke said, his tone brisk and businesslike once more, and some form of shelter before nightfall. This beach is too exposed. Evelyn stood on shaky legs, using a piece of driftwood to steady herself. I'll help look. He gave her a long, assessing look that made her bristle. You can barely stand. I'll manage. She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze with as much dignity as she could muster in her bedraggled state. I'm not fragile, Your Grace, and I'm not going to sit by the fire like a helpless damsel while you do everything. His lips twitched, barely, almost imperceptibly, and she wondered if she'd imagined it. Very well, he said. But stay close. We don't know what's in those woods. Together, they left the beach and entered the forest. The trees closed around them like a living cathedral, dense and ancient and utterly silent. No birdsong, no rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, just the soft crunch of their footsteps on the carpet of pine needles and dead leaves. It should have been beautiful, the way the filtered light fell in pale shafts through the canopy, the rich smell of earth and moss, the sense of stepping into another world entirely. But there was something oppressive about it too, something that made the hair on the back of Evelyn's neck stand up. Stay close, the Duke repeated, his voice low. She didn't argue. They walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The Duke moved with surprising ease through the terrain, pausing occasionally to examine broken branches or disturbed soil with the focus of someone who actually knew what they were looking for. Evelyn followed, her dress catching on thorns and low branches, her legs aching with every step. Pride kept her from complaining. There, the Duke said suddenly, pointing ahead. She followed his gaze and saw it, a small stream cutting through the forest, the water running clear over smooth stones. Relief flooded through her. They approached the stream and the Duke knelt by the edge, cupping his hands to taste the water. After a moment, he nodded. It's fresh. No salt. We can drink. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, too thirsty to worry about propriety or maintaining distance. She dipped her hands into the cold water and brought it to her lips, drinking greedily. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted, clean and cold and life-giving. When she finally sat back, breathless and dripping, she found the Duke watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What? She asked defensively. Nothing. He looked away, back toward the forest. We should follow the stream. It might lead to a better location for shelter. They walked along the bank, the sound of running water a companionable presence in the otherwise silent woods. The forest began to change subtly, the trees spaced slightly farther apart, the undergrowth less dense, and then through a gap in the foliage Evelyn saw it, a small clearing protected on three sides by a natural rock formation that rose up like a wall. The stream ran along one edge, providing easy access to water. And best of all, tucked against the base of the rocks was what looked like the remnants of a shelter, old, half-collapsed, but still offering some semblance of protection. Someone was here before, Evelyn breathed. The Duke approached the structure cautiously. examining it with a critical eye. Hunters, maybe, or explorers. It's been abandoned for a while, but the basic framework is sound. We can repair it. We. The word hung between them, small but significant. It'll be dark soon, the Duke continued, already moving toward the fallen branches scattered around the clearing. Help me gather wood. We'll need a much larger fire than what we had on the beach if we want to stay warm through the night. Evelyn nodded and set to work. They worked in silence, falling into an unspoken rhythm. She gathered smaller branches and pine needles for kindling, while he dragged larger logs to the shelter site. Occasionally their paths would cross, and she'd catch a glimpse of the strain in his face, the way he moved with just a hint of stiffness that suggested he was more injured than he'd let on. "Your shoulder," she said during one such moment. "You're favoring it." "It's fine. Let me see." "Miss Hartley, let me see," she repeated more firmly this time. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, but stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. Slowly, he pulled back the collar of his shirt, revealing a nasty bruise that spread across his shoulder and collarbone, dark purple edged with sickly yellow. Evelyn winced. "That needs to be treated." "With what?" He gestured to the forest around them. "We have no supplies, no medicine. It will heal on its own. Or it will get infected and you'll die, leaving me stranded here alone." She softened her tone slightly. "There are plants that can help. My father taught me some field medicine when I was young. Let me at least try." He regarded her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "After we finish here," he said, "before the light fades completely." It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they'd transformed the clearing. The shelter was reinforced with fresh branches, woven between the old framework, creating a windbreak that would at least keep out the worst of the night chill. A fire pit had been dug near the entrance, lined with stones from the stream. And beside it, Evelyn had arranged her findings: strips of bark that could serve as bandages, leaves from a plant she recognized as having mild antiseptic properties, and moss for padding. The Duke watched as she worked, his expression unreadable. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a flat rock near the fire. He obeyed with surprising docility, lowering himself onto the makeshift seat. Evelyn knelt beside him, her hands steady despite the sudden awareness of their proximity. She'd never touched him before, not really. Even during the shipwreck, it had all been chaos and survival instinct. This was different, deliberate, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the strange vulnerability of caring for another human being. She began by cleaning the bruised area with water from the stream, using a piece of fabric torn from her already ruined petticoat. The Duke didn't flinch, though she knew it must have hurt. His jaw tightened slightly, and she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin, but he made no sound. "You were in the army," she said softly, needing to fill the silence. "Where were you stationed?" "Spain, during the Peninsular War." "How long?" 2 years, until I was called back when my father died." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Duty demanded I take up the title." Evelyn crushed the antiseptic leaves between her palms, releasing their bitter scent, and pressed them gently against the worst of the bruising. "Did you want to go back? To the war?" The question surprised them both. The Duke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "Yes, I did." She understood what he wasn't saying, that becoming a duke had been a cage, not a crown, that the responsibilities and expectations had trapped him just as surely as society's rules had trapped her. "You're good at this," he said suddenly, watching her work. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she kept her focus on his shoulder. "My father believed women should know practical skills. Medicine. Navigation. Things beyond needlepoint and watercolors. My uncle thought it was scandalous." "Your uncle sounds like a fool." She looked up, startled, and found the Duke's eyes on her, really on her for perhaps the first time since they'd met. There was no coldness there now, no carefully maintained distance, just something raw and honest that made her heart skip. "Thank you," she whispered. His hand came up, slowly, carefully, and his fingers brushed a strand of damp hair back from her face. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent a shock of awareness through her entire body. "You're welcome," he said, his voice low and rough in a way she'd never heard it before. For a moment, The world narrowed to just the two of them, the crackling fire, the gathering darkness, the warmth of his skin beneath her hands. Then a log shifted in the fire pit, sending up a shower of sparks, and the spell broke. Evelyn pulled back, her heart racing. That should help. The bruising will take time to heal, but as long as it doesn't get infected, you'll be fine. Thanks to you. The Duke stood, rolling his shoulder experimentally. We should eat something. I found some berries earlier. I believe they're safe. They shared the meager meal in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. But something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. The hostility that had defined their interactions before was gone, replaced by something more complex. Something dangerous. As darkness fell completely and the forest came alive with nocturnal sounds, Evelyn lay down in the shelter, exhausted beyond measure. The Duke took up position by the entrance, his back against the wooden frame, keeping watch. You should sleep too, Evelyn said quietly. I will. In a while. She wanted to argue, to point out that he needed rest as much as she did. But her eyes were already closing, her body surrendering to exhaustion. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the Duke's silhouette against the firelight, steady and strong, a guardian between her and the darkness. And for the first time since the ship went down, she felt almost safe. Morning came slowly, filtered through layers of mist that clung to the forest floor like something alive. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke and something else, something unfamiliar and strangely appealing. Her eyes opened to find pale light seeping through the gaps in their makeshift shelter, and for a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The shipwreck, the island, the Duke. The Duke, who was currently crouched by the fire, turning something over the flames with a stick. She sat up, wincing as her muscles protested. Every part of her body ached from yesterday's ordeal, and her dress, what was left of it, had dried into a stiff, uncomfortable mass of fabric and salt. You're awake, the Duke said without turning around. Good. Breakfast is almost ready. Breakfast, Evelyn's voice came out rough with sleep. She cleared her throat and tried again. What kind of breakfast? Fish. I set some traps in the stream last night. He glanced back at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction at having provided. They're small, but they'll keep us from starving. Evelyn moved to the entrance of the shelter, her curiosity overcoming her stiffness. Sure enough, 2 small fish were roasting over the coals, their skin crisping and golden. Her stomach growled loudly in response. The Duke's lips twitched. I'll take that as approval. Where did you learn to make fish traps? She asked, settling herself on the same flat rock she'd used last night. The stone was cool beneath her, already damp with morning dew. The army, and before that my grandfather's estate in Scotland. He removed the fish from the fire, using 2 flat stones as makeshift plates. We had a river that ran through the property. My brother and I used to spend entire summers there living like savages, while our tutors despaired. It was the most personal information he'd ever shared with her, the most human he'd ever seemed. You have a brother? She accepted the fish he offered, the heat of it warming her palms through the stone. Something shuddered in his expression. Had. He died at Waterloo. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. The Duke didn't respond, just turned his attention to his own meal. They ate in silence, Evelyn trying not to wolf down the food despite her gnawing hunger. The fish was surprisingly good, smoky and tender, with a richness that reminded her how long it had been since she'd eaten anything substantial. When they finished, the Duke stood and surveyed the forest with the same assessing look she'd seen him use in ballrooms, calculating odds and strategies. We need to explore, he said, find out how large this island is, whether there are any other survivors, and if there's any hope of signaling a passing ship. You think there might be other survivors? Hope flickered in her chest. It's possible. The lifeboats made it into the water before the ship went down. Some of them might have reached land. His jaw tightened. We need to know. Evelyn nodded, pushing herself to her feet. Then let's go. They followed the coastline, staying just inside the tree line where the forest met the beach. The Duke moved with purpose, his long strides eating up ground while Evelyn struggled to keep pace in her ruined dress. The fabric kept tangling around her legs, the weight of it dragging with every step. After the 3rd time she stumbled, the Duke stopped and turned back to her, frustration clear on his face. "That dress is going to get you killed," he said bluntly. "I'm aware of that, thank you." Evelyn's own frustration bled into her voice. "Unfortunately, I didn't pack alternative clothing for a shipwreck." The Duke studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to some decision. "Wait here." He disappeared into the forest before she could ask what he was doing. Evelyn stood on the beach, feeling ridiculous and exposed, the morning sun already beginning to heat her skin. She could hear the ocean behind her, deceptively peaceful now, lapping gently at the shore, as if it hadn't destroyed an entire ship less than 2 days ago. The Duke returned, carrying several long strips of something green. Vines, she realized, thick and fibrous. "Turn around," he instructed. "I beg your pardon?" "Your dress. The skirts need to be shortened, or you'll break your neck before we make it a mile." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "I'm going to tie them up, unless you'd prefer to do it yourself." Evelyn's face heated. The thought of him touching her dress, of his hands that close to her body, made something flutter nervously in her stomach. But he was right. The dress was dangerous in its current state. "Fine," she said stiffly, and turned around. She felt rather than saw him move closer. His presence was a tangible thing at her back, warm and solid. Then his hands were at her waist, gathering the excess fabric of her skirts with surprising efficiency. His fingers brushed against her hip through the layers of cloth, and she had to bite her lip to keep from gasping at the contact. "Hold still," he murmured, his voice closer than she'd expected. He worked quickly, using the vines to tie the gathered fabric up and out of the way. It wasn't elegant, she probably looked absurd, but when he stepped back and she took an experimental step, the difference was immediate. She could move freely, her legs unencumbered. "Better?" he asked. She turned to face him and found his eyes on her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. "Yes. Thank you." Something passed between them, a charge in the air, heavy and unspoken. Then the Duke looked away, clearing his throat. "We should keep moving. We're losing daylight." They walked for hours, the forest on one side and the ocean on the other, neither speaking much. The island was larger than Evelyn had initially thought, the coastline stretching on seemingly forever. They found no signs of other survivors, no wreckage beyond what had already washed up on their beach, no footprints, no evidence of campfires, just endless sand and trees and the constant sound of waves. "Maybe they landed on the other side," Evelyn said, though even to her own ears the hope sounded hollow. "Maybe," the Duke agreed, but she could hear the doubt in his voice. The sun was directly overhead when they stopped to rest in the shade of an enormous oak tree. Evelyn sank down onto the sand, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The Duke remained standing for a moment longer, scanning the horizon with those sharp, calculating eyes. "We should head back," he finally said. "We've covered enough ground for today, and I don't want to be caught out here after dark." Evelyn nodded, too tired to argue, but as she started to push herself up, her hand touched something half buried in the sand, something that didn't feel like a shell or a rock. She dug it out carefully, her heart beginning to pound. It was a knife, not a sailor's knife or something that might have come from the ship. This was different, older, the handle wrapped in cracked leather, the blade rusted but still intact. Someone had been here, someone who had needed a weapon. The Duke crouched beside her, taking the knife from her hands. He turned it over, examining it with a frown. "This has been here a while," he said quietly. "Months, at least, maybe longer. But someone was here." Evelyn looked around the beach with new eyes, searching for other signs. "Someone survived and either left or died here," the Duke finished, his voice flat. "Either way, they're long gone." The implication hung between them, cold and unavoidable. They might not be the first people to be stranded on this island, and they might not be the first to die here either. The Duke slipped the knife into his belt, the movement casual, but his expression grim. "Come on. We need to get back to camp before—" A sound cut him off, a rustling in the forest behind them, too loud and deliberate to be the wind. They both froze. The Duke's hand went to the knife, his body shifting subtly to place himself between Evelyn and whatever was in the trees. His eyes had gone hard, alert, every muscle tense and ready. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The rustling came again, closer this time, branches snapping. Something big moving through the undergrowth. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind conjured images of wild animals, bears, wolves, things with teeth and claws. She pressed closer to the Duke's back, hating herself for the fear, but unable to stop it. And then it emerged from the forest. Not an animal, a man. He was filthy, his clothes little more than rags, his hair and beard wild and matted. But his eyes were sharp and aware and fixed on them with an intensity that made Evelyn's blood run cold. For a long moment, no one moved. The stranger looked at them, and they looked back, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then the man smiled, showing teeth that were surprisingly white in his weathered face. "Well," he said, his voice rough from disuse but unmistakably English, "I wasn't expecting company." The Duke's hand tightened on the knife. "Who are you?" "I could ask you the same question." The stranger's smile widened, "But I suspect we already know the answer. Shipwreck survivors, yes? The storm 2 nights ago." "Yes," Evelyn said before the Duke could stop her. "Our ship went down. We've been stranded here since. Are there others? Did anyone else survive?" The stranger's expression shifted, something that might have been pity crossing his face. "Others? No, I'm afraid you're the only ones I've seen. But then I haven't been to the eastern shore in weeks. There might be survivors there." "How long have you been here?" the Duke asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Here? On this god-forsaken rock?" The stranger laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3 years, maybe 4. I stopped counting after the first winter. 3 years. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "But surely," she started, "surely someone came looking. Surely a ship passed by." The stranger shook his head. "This island isn't on any maps, my dear. We're too far from the shipping lanes. The only reason I'm still alive is luck and stubbornness." The Duke's expression had gone carefully blank, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw had tightened. He was calculating, weighing options, deciding whether this man was a threat or an asset. "You've survived here for 3 years, the Duke said slowly. "You must know the island well. Better than anyone, I'd wager." The stranger's eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride or madness. "I know where the fresh water is, where the game trails run, which plants are safe to eat and which will kill you. I know every cave, every clearing, every dangerous tide pool. Then perhaps," the Duke said carefully, "we could come to an arrangement. You help us survive, teach us what you know. In exchange for what?" The stranger's smile turned sharp. "What could you possibly offer me that I don't already have?" "Hope," Evelyn said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "Hope that we might find a way off this island," she continued, meeting the stranger's eyes. 3 people have a better chance than 1, and if we do find rescue, we'll make sure you come with us." The stranger studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he threw back his head and laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees like breaking glass. "Hope," he repeated, still chuckling. "I'd almost forgotten what that sounded like." He stepped forward, extending a grimy hand. "Thomas Beckett, former lieutenant in His Majesty's Navy, and apparently your new neighbor." The Duke hesitated only a moment before gripping the offered hand. "Alexander Pemberton, Duke of Ashbourne." Beckett's eyebrows shot up. "A duke? Well, well. The island does attract a higher class of castaway these days." His eyes shifted to Evelyn. "And you are?" "Lady Evelyn Hartley." "A pleasure, Lady Evelyn." Beckett's smile softened slightly. "Though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "As do I, Mr. Beckett." "Just Beckett, please. We're beyond formality out here." He gestured back toward the forest. "Come. My camp is about an hour's walk inland. You'll be safer there than wherever you've been sheltering. And I have food, real food, not just fish and berries." The Duke glanced at Evelyn, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a small nod. They didn't have much choice. "Lead the way," the Duke said. As they followed Beckett into the forest, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. For better or worse, they were no longer alone on the island. But alone, she was beginning to realize, might have been safer. Beckett's camp was nothing like their crude shelter. It was a proper structure, walls made of woven branches and packed mud, a roof thatched with palm fronds that looked weatherproof and solid. Inside, it was surprisingly organized, a sleeping platform raised off the ground, storage areas carved into the natural rock face, Even a rudimentary table fashioned from a flat stone balanced on two stumps. "Home sweet home," Beckett said, spreading his arms with a theatrical flourish. "Not Buckingham Palace, I'll grant you, but it keeps the rain out and the predators away." "Predators?" Evelyn's voice came out higher than she intended. Beckett's smile was grim. "Wild boar, mostly. They're not native to the island, probably left by explorers centuries ago, but they've thrived here. Mean bastards, especially the males. Keep your distance if you see one." The Duke moved through the space with the same assessing look he'd worn earlier, cataloguing every detail. Evelyn watched him take note of Beckett's supplies: dried meat hanging from the ceiling, clay pots that likely held water or preserved food, fishing nets mended and ready for use, and, most tellingly, weapons. A spear leaning against the wall, a bow with a quiver of arrows, several more knives of varying sizes. "You've done well for yourself," the Duke observed, his tone carefully neutral. 3 years is a long time to learn or die." Beckett pulled down strips of what looked like dried fish and offered them. "Eat. You both look half-starved." Evelyn accepted gratefully, too hungry to be polite. The fish was tough and salty, but it was food, and her body craved it desperately. "The Eastern Shore," the Duke said between bites. "You mentioned you haven't been there in weeks. How large is this island?" "Maybe 10 miles across at the widest point, less from north to south." Beckett settled himself on the stone table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "The Eastern Shore is rockier, harder to traverse. If your ship went down during the storm, any survivors who made it to land would more likely wash up there. The currents run that direction." Hope flared again in Evelyn's chest. "Then we need to go there. We need to search." "We will," the Duke said firmly. "Tomorrow, after we've rested and prepared properly." Beckett's gaze moved between them, something calculating in his expression. "You two make an interesting pair. A duke and a lady stranded together. I imagine society would have quite a bit to say about that." "Society is the least of our concerns at the moment," the Duke said coldly. "True enough." Beckett's smile was knowing. "Out here, the old rules don't mean much. Survival is the only thing that matters." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. As the afternoon wore on, Beckett showed them around his territory, the best fishing spots in the stream, the grove where edible plants grew, the paths that were safe to travel, and the areas to avoid. He moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who'd earned every bit of his knowledge through hard experience. "The island has moods," he explained as they walked. "The weather can turn violent in minutes. The tides are treacherous on the northern point. And there are caves along the western cliffs, but they flood during storms. I lost a full week's worth of supplies learning that particular lesson." Evelyn listened carefully, committing every detail to memory. Beside her, the Duke did the same, his questions precise and strategic. She could see him building a mental map of the island, identifying resources and dangers with military efficiency. They were alike in that way, she realized. Both of them adapting, assessing, refusing to give in to despair. "There's one more thing you should know," Beckett said as they headed back to his camp. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. "The northeastern corner of the island. There's something there. Ruins. Old stone structures that predate any British presence in these waters." "Ruins?" The Duke's interest sharpened. "What kind of structures?" "I don't know." "I've only been there twice, and both times," Beckett's expression darkened. "Both times I felt like I was being watched, like something was waiting there. Call it superstition if you want, but I don't go there anymore." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine, despite the warm evening air. "Noted," the Duke said calmly. "We'll avoid the area." They returned to find Beckett's fire already prepared, the flames casting dancing shadows across the camp. He produced more food, roots that had been roasted until they were sweet and tender, and a small portion of meat from an animal Evelyn didn't recognize and decided not to ask about. As they ate, Beckett asked questions: where they were from, what had brought them onto the ship, how they'd survived the wreck. The Duke answered with his usual economy of words, revealing nothing that wasn't strictly necessary. But Evelyn found herself talking more than she'd intended, perhaps because Beckett was the first new person they'd encountered in days, or perhaps because the isolation was already making her desperate for human connection beyond the Duke's brooding presence. "So you were running away," Beckett said when she mentioned her uncle's attempts to arrange her marriage. "I was seeking freedom," Evelyn corrected, lifting her chin. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Beckett's smile was enigmatic. "It seems to me running and seeking are two sides of the same coin. Both require leaving something behind." "And what were you running from, Mr. Beckett?" the Duke asked, his voice quiet but sharp. The smile faded from Beckett's face. "Nothing, and everything. The Navy. It didn't end well for me. Court-martial, disgrace. When my ship sank in these waters, I suppose some might say I got what I deserved." "No one deserves to be stranded and forgotten," Evelyn said softly. Beckett's eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment she saw genuine pain there. "You're kind, Lady Evelyn. Hold on to that. The island will try to take it from you." As darkness fell completely, Beckett offered them space in his shelter. "It's not large, but it's better than whatever you've cobbled together on the beach. You'll be warmer here. Safer." The Duke hesitated, and Evelyn could read the calculation in his expression. Accepting hospitality meant obligation. It meant trust. And trust was a dangerous currency with a man they'd known for mere hours. But practical need won out. "Thank you," the Duke said. "We accept." Beckett showed them to a corner of the shelter that he'd already prepared with dried grass for bedding. "I'll take first watch tonight. We rotate every few hours. You'll learn the rhythm soon enough." "Watch for what?" Evelyn asked. "Everything." Beckett's expression was serious. "The boar I mentioned, snakes, storms, and sometimes—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Sometimes just the dark. It plays tricks out here." He left them alone, settling himself by the entrance with his spear across his knees. Evelyn sat on the grass bedding, suddenly aware of how close she would be sleeping to the Duke. The shelter was cramped, the space intimate in a way that made her heart beat faster. The Duke seemed to be thinking the same thing. He remained standing, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'll sleep by the entrance," he said finally. "Give you privacy." "Don't be ridiculous. You need rest as much as I do, and Beckett's already at the entrance." Evelyn kept her voice steady, practical. "We're adults. We can manage one night of proximity without it being scandalous." His eyes found hers in the dimness, and she saw something flicker there, something that made her breath catch. "As you wish," he said quietly. He lowered himself to the other side of the makeshift bed, carefully maintaining distance. But the space was small, and Evelyn could feel the heat of him beside her, could hear the sound of his breathing in the darkness. "Your Grace," she whispered after a long silence. "Alexander." "What?" "My name is Alexander." He shifted slightly, and she felt rather than saw him turn toward her. "If we're going to survive here together, you might as well use it." "Alexander," she repeated, testing the name. It felt intimate, dangerous, like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Then you should call me Evelyn." "Evelyn." The way he said it, low and careful, made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Do you think Beckett is telling the truth?" she asked. "About being here for 3 years?" "I don't know, but his survival skills are real enough." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "We'll keep our guard up. Trust, but verify." "That sounds lonely." "It sounds smart." Evelyn rolled onto her side, though she couldn't see his face in the darkness. "Is that how you've lived? Never trusting anyone completely?" "It's kept me alive." "But has it made you happy?" The question hung between them, too personal and too raw. She half expected him to shut her down, to retreat behind his usual walls. Instead, he surprised her. "No," he admitted quietly. "It hasn't." Evelyn's heart squeezed. She reached out in the darkness, her hand finding his. His fingers were warm and calloused, and they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "We'll find a way off this island," she said. "We'll survive this. Together." "Together," he repeated, and something in his voice made it sound like a promise. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped in the darkness, the sound of the ocean distant and the fire crackling softly outside their shelter. Neither of them saw Beckett watching from the entrance, his expression unreadable, his eyes reflecting the firelight like a predator's in the night. Dawn broke with the sound of rain. Not the violent deluge of the storm that had destroyed their ship, but a steady, persistent drizzle that turned the world grey and made everything damp. Evelyn woke to the sensation of Alexander's hand still holding hers, his breathing deep and even beside her. For a moment she didn't move, didn't want to break whatever fragile thing had formed between them in the darkness. Then Beckett's voice cut through the morning quiet. "We should wait out the rain before heading east. The paths will be slick, and we'll be moving through difficult terrain." Alexander's hand tightened briefly around hers before releasing. He sat up, his hair mussed from sleep, a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. He looked nothing like the pristine Duke she'd known in London, and somehow that made him more real, more present. "How long will the rain last?" Alexander asked, his voice rough from sleep. Beckett shrugged, poking at the fire he'd kept burning through the night. "Could be an hour, could be all day, the island decides." Evelyn pushed herself up, her muscles protesting. She felt Alexander's eyes on her, that same intensity from last night, before he looked away and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. They spent the morning confined to the shelter, while rain drummed steadily on the thatched roof. Beckett occupied himself with repairing fishing nets, his hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd performed the task 1,000 times. Alexander watched him work, asking occasional questions about technique and materials. Evelyn found herself studying both men, the contrast between them striking. Beckett was lean and weathered, his movements economical, his eyes constantly darting to the forest beyond as if expecting threat. Alexander remained controlled even in stillness, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, as if proximity to Beckett made him vigilant in a way the wilderness alone hadn't. "You said you were court-martialed," Alexander said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "What were the charges?" Beckett's hands stilled on the net. His smile, when it came, was brittle. "Direct, aren't you?" "I find it saves time." "Insubordination, striking a superior officer." Beckett resumed his work, though his movements had lost their ease. "The officer in question was beating a cabin boy, 14 years old, for spilling rum. I intervened. The captain took exception to my methods." "Your methods?" Evelyn asked. "I broke the bastard's nose." Beckett's voice held no remorse. "Would do it again given the chance. But the Navy values hierarchy over justice, so here I am." Alexander studied him for a long moment. That took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they looked the same. The rain finally eased around midday, thinning to a mist that clung to the forest like breath. Beckett declared it passable, and they prepared to leave. He distributed supplies, strips of dried meat, water skins made from animal bladders, and weapons. A knife for Evelyn, though she already had the one Alexander had found. A longer blade for Alexander. Beckett kept his spear. "Stay close," Beckett instructed as they set out. "The eastern trails are narrow and the undergrowth is thick, easy to get turned around." They moved in single file, Beckett leading, then Evelyn, with Alexander bringing up the rear. His presence at her back was a constant, reassuring pressure. Every so often she'd glance behind and find his eyes already on her, alert and watchful. The forest here was different from the western side, darker, more oppressive. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a canopy so dense that little light penetrated. Moss covered everything, thick and emerald green, muffling their footsteps. The air smelled of rot and growing things, fecund and heavy. "Careful here," Beckett said, pointing to a patch of ground that looked no different from the rest. "Bog. Step wrong and you'll sink to your waist before you can blink." They skirted the dangerous area, following a path that only Beckett seemed able to see. Evelyn's nerves stretched tighter with each step. The silence here felt wrong. No bird song, no rustle of small animals, just the drip of water from leaves and their own carefully placed footfalls. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Another hour to reach the eastern cliffs. Then we follow the coast north." Beckett paused, tilting his head as if listening to something she couldn't hear. "The rocks there are sharp. The tide comes in fast. We'll need to time it right." They pressed on. The forest eventually began to thin, and Evelyn could hear it before she saw it. The crash of waves against stone, louder and more violent than the gentle lapping at their beach. When they finally emerged from the trees, she understood why. The eastern shore was a wall of black rock rising 30 feet from the water, jagged and unforgiving. Waves exploded against it with tremendous force, sending spray high into the air. No gentle beach here, no safe landing, just stone and fury and the unrelenting assault of the sea. "Dear God," Evelyn breathed, "if anyone survived the wreck and washed up here..." Alexander's voice was grim. "They wouldn't have lasted long." Maybe they made it to the rocks, Evelyn said, desperate to hold on to hope. Maybe they climbed up. Beckett pointed north along the cliff line. There are places where the rocks form natural steps. If they had strength left after the swim, they might have made it. We'll search. But Evelyn... He used her first name deliberately, his expression gentle. Don't expect miracles. They spent hours traversing the cliffs, searching every accessible outcropping and crevice. The rocks were slippery with spray, treacherous even in the fading afternoon light. Alexander insisted on going first wherever the path was dangerous, testing each handhold before allowing Evelyn to follow. I'm not helpless, she snapped after the third time he physically blocked her way to check the route ahead. I know that. His eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering. But if you fall, I'll go down after you, and then we'll both be dead. So let me be cautious. The words struck her silent. The implication in them, that he would follow her into death without hesitation, made something in her chest constrict painfully. They found evidence of the wreck as the day wore on. Pieces of timber wedged between rocks, a trunk floating in a tidal pool, its contents ruined by salt water, a sailor's cap caught on an outcropping, but no people, no signs of survivors. Until Beckett called out from farther up the cliff. Here, I found something. Evelyn and Alexander scrambled over the rocks to reach him. Beckett stood at the entrance to a small cave, barely more than a hollow in the cliff face, pointing to something inside. Footprints, human footprints, pressed into the sandy floor of the cave. And more than that, marks on the wall, scratched into the stone with something sharp. Letters, crude but deliberate. Alexander moved closer, his expression intent as he read aloud. 7 made it to shore. 3 injured, following the coast north. God have mercy. When? Evelyn's voice shook. How long ago? Beckett knelt by the footprints, examining them with the careful attention of a tracker. Not fresh? 2 days, maybe 3. Before the rain. The same night as our wreck, Alexander said quietly. 7 survivors. 7 people who'd made it this far, only to disappear into the island's embrace. They went north, Evelyn said, hope kindling again. We can follow their trail. We can find them. It's nearly dark, Beckett cautioned. These cliffs are dangerous enough in daylight. In darkness, they're suicide. Then we camp here tonight and leave at first light. Alexander's tone brooked no argument. Those people need help. They could be injured, lost, dying. Beckett's eyes narrowed. Or they could be dead already. The island takes what it wants, Your Grace. Sometimes the kindest thing is to accept that. I don't accept it. Alexander's voice was cold steel. We search until we find them or find proof they're gone. That's not negotiable. For a moment, tension crackled between the two men, and Evelyn wondered if it would come to violence. Then Beckett's expression shifted into something like respect. Very well, we search. He gestured to the cave. This is as good a place as any to shelter for the night. Small, but defensible. I'll gather firewood before the light fails completely. He disappeared back down the rocks, leaving Evelyn and Alexander alone in the cave's entrance. That was bold, Evelyn said quietly, challenging him like that. He needed to understand where we stand. Alexander turned to her, and in the fading light, his eyes were dark and unreadable. Those survivors are out there, Evelyn, scared and hurt and praying someone will find them. I won't abandon them to make things easier for us. I know. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. That's why I... She stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Why you what? His voice had gone soft, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. Why I'm beginning to think I was wrong about you. The admission cost her, but it was true. You're not the man I thought you were. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. Neither are you the woman I thought. You're stronger, braver. His thumb traced a circle on her wrist, a touch so light it might have been accidental. More stubborn, certainly. Despite everything, the danger, the isolation, the fear, Evelyn found herself smiling. I could say the same about you. Stubborn? Among other things. They stood there as the darkness gathered, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, could see the way his gaze dropped to her mouth before jerking away. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Beckett's voice shattered the moment. Got wood? And I found something else you'll want to see." They moved apart quickly, the spell broken, but when Alexander extended his hand to help her down from the cave entrance, Evelyn took it without hesitation, and neither of them let go as they descended to where Beckett waited. The something else turned out to be more wreckage, a ship's chest that had washed into a protected pool among the rocks. Together, they managed to haul it onto dry ground and force the warped lid open. Inside, miraculously preserved by the chest's tight seal, blankets, medical supplies, flint and steel, and a pistol with a small amount of powder wrapped in oilcloth. "This changes things," Alexander said, examining the pistol with practiced hands. "It's not much, but it's better than knives and spears." "Better for what?" Beckett's voice held an edge Evelyn hadn't heard before. "Hunting? Defense? Or did you have something else in mind?" Alexander met his eyes steadily. "Whatever becomes necessary." Another moment of tension, sharp and dangerous. Then Beckett smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Keep it then, you might need it." They built a fire in the cave entrance, using the rocks as a windbreak. The blankets from the chest made their shelter significantly more comfortable, and the medical supplies, though limited, would be invaluable if they found the survivors. As the three of them shared another meager meal, Evelyn found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the darkness beyond their fire. Out there, somewhere in the night, 7 people were either surviving or already dead, and tomorrow they would find out which. "Tell me about the ruins," Alexander said suddenly, breaking the silence. "The ones you mentioned in the northeast." Beckett's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because if the survivors followed the coast north, they might have found them. Shelter would be their first priority." "The ruins aren't shelter." Beckett's voice had gone flat. "They're wrong. The stones are arranged in patterns that don't make sense. There are markings on them, not any language I recognize. And the feeling there—" He shook his head. "I told you, something watches from those ruins." "You said you've been there twice," Evelyn pressed. "What happened those times?" Beckett stared into the fire, his expression distant. "The first time I heard voices, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I told myself it was the wind, the way it moves through the stones, but the second time—" He paused, his hands clenching. "The second time I saw something, a shadow that moved wrong, that watched me. I ran, and I swear it followed. I could feel it at my back all the way to my camp." Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. "Superstition," Alexander said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe." Beckett's eyes glinted in the firelight. "Or maybe this island is older than we know. Maybe we're not the first to be stranded here. Maybe we won't be the last." "That's enough," Evelyn said sharply, surprising herself. "We're all exhausted and frightened, and telling ghost stories won't help anyone. We search for the survivors tomorrow. If we find the ruins, we'll deal with them then, with clear heads and daylight." Both men looked at her, and she saw respect in their gazes. "You're right," Alexander said. "We should rest. I'll take first watch." "Wake me in 3 hours," Beckett said. "You need sleep as much as anyone." They settled in for the night, arranged around the fire. Evelyn wrapped herself in one of the salvaged blankets, the wool scratchy but warm. She tried to sleep, but her mind raced with images of survivors struggling through the darkness, of ruins that watched, of shadows that moved wrong. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to the sound of voices, low, urgent. Alexander and Beckett, speaking in tones carefully modulated not to wake her. "Don't trust you," Alexander was saying. "Smart." Beckett's voice held dark amusement. "I wouldn't trust me either. But out here, Your Grace, trust is a luxury. What matters is whether we're useful to each other. And when we stop being useful, then we part ways. Or we don't." A pause. "You care about her, the lady." It wasn't a question. Evelyn's breath caught. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing even, every nerve straining to hear Alexander's response. "That's none of your concern. It is if it makes you reckless. Care makes men do stupid things, heroic things, fatal things. I'm not a fool, Beckett. I know what's at stake." "Do you?" Another pause, longer this time. 3 years I've survived here alone. Know why? Because I don't let sentiment cloud my judgment. Because I accept the island's rules. You're still trying to impose your own rules, your own code. That's going to get you killed. Then I'll die honorably. You'll just die." Beckett's voice dropped even lower. "But I'll make you a deal. I'll help you find your survivors. I'll teach you what I know. And if rescue comes, I'll make sure Lady Evelyn gets home safely. But in return, you accept that sometimes survival means doing things that would horrify your London society. What things? Whatever becomes necessary. The words hung there, chilling and ambiguous. Evelyn waited for Alexander's response, her heart pounding so hard she was certain they would hear it. I'll do what I must to protect Evelyn, Alexander said finally, but I won't become a monster to do it. Beckett laughed softly. The island will test that conviction, Your Grace, and I have a feeling you'll surprise yourself. Silence fell then, and after a few minutes, Evelyn heard the sound of movement, someone settling down to sleep, someone else taking up watch position. She lay in the darkness, her mind spinning. Alexander cared about her, enough that Beckett had noticed, enough that it was being used as leverage. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets. Outside the cave, waves crashed against stone with relentless fury, and somewhere in the night, 7 survivors waited for rescue that might never come. Tomorrow they would search. Tomorrow they would face whatever the island held. But tonight, wrapped in wool that smelled of salt and smoke, Evelyn allowed herself one moment of something dangerously close to hope. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of Alexander's hand in hers, steady and warm in the darkness. Morning came with fog so thick it turned the world into something unreal. Evelyn woke to find Alexander crouched at the cave entrance, staring into the white nothingness with an expression that made her chest tighten. He looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his eyes, his jaw tight with tension he was barely containing. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. Some. A lie. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. Beckett was already up and moving, checking their supplies with the efficiency of long practice. "The fog will burn off in an hour or so. We can start the search then." "We start now," Alexander said, his voice flat and unyielding. "Those people have been out here for 3 days. Every hour we wait could mean the difference between life and death. Every hour we wait could also mean we don't fall off a cliff in the fog," Beckett countered. "Dead rescuers help no one." Evelyn pushed herself up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. "We can follow the cliff line. Stay close to the rock face. As long as we're careful, the fog shouldn't be a problem." Both men looked at her, and she lifted her chin, daring them to argue. Alexander's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. "Practical as always, Lady Evelyn. Someone has to be." They gathered their things and set out into the fog, moving slowly, feeling their way along the rocks. The world had shrunk to a radius of perhaps 10 feet in any direction. Beyond that, everything dissolved into blank whiteness. The sound of the waves was muffled, distant, coming from all directions at once, in a way that was profoundly disorienting. Beckett led again, testing each step before committing his weight. "Stay in single file. Keep one hand on the rock wall. If you lose contact with it, stop immediately and call out." They moved like that for what felt like hours, though Evelyn suspected it was less. Time became elastic in the fog, stretching and compressing in ways that made her head swim. Occasionally they would call out, hoping for a response from the survivors. But only silence answered, heavy and complete. The fog did eventually begin to thin, just as Beckett had predicted. First it went from white to grey, then from grey to translucent. Shapes emerged gradually, rocks, trees, the darker line of the forest beyond the cliffs. And then, quite suddenly, the sun burned through, and the world snapped back into focus. They stood on a narrow shelf of rock, perhaps 50 feet above the water. Ahead the cliffs curved inland, forming a small bay where the waves were less violent. And beyond that, rising from the forest floor like broken teeth, were the ruins. Evelyn's breath caught. They were unlike anything she'd expected. Not medieval castle ruins or Roman columns, but something older. Strange. The stones were massive, each one easily twice the height of a man, and they were arranged in a circle around a central structure that might once have been a temple or a tomb. The surface of each stone was covered in carvings, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the morning light. "There," Alexander said, pointing. "Do you see?" Evelyn followed his gaze and saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from somewhere within the ruins. A fire, which meant people, which meant survivors. "Thank God," she breathed. But Beckett's expression had gone dark, his hand tight on his spear. "Something's wrong." What do you mean? Alexander demanded. The smoke, it's too thin. A survival fire would be larger, hotter. That's barely an ember. His eyes scanned the ruins with growing unease. And I don't hear anything. No voices, no movement, nothing. He was right. The silence was complete, unnatural. Even the birds that had begun to call with the sunrise seemed to avoid this area. We need to get down there, Alexander said, already looking for a path. Wait. Beckett grabbed his arm. Let me go first. Scout, if something's wrong, they need help more, not less. Alexander pulled free, his face set in determined lines. You can come or you can stay, but I'm going. He started down the rocks without waiting for a response. Evelyn moved to follow, but Beckett's hand on her shoulder stopped her. Stay close to me, he said quietly. If things go bad, I'll get you out. That's the promise I made. I don't need protection, she started, but he cut her off. Everyone needs protection eventually, even dukes, even ladies who think they're stronger than they are. His eyes were serious, almost sad. Just stay close, Evelyn. Please. The use of her name, the genuine concern in his voice made her nod. They descended together, following Alexander's path. The rocks gave way to sandy soil, then to the cleared area around the ruins. Up close, the stones were even more massive, and the carvings. Evelyn couldn't look at them directly. They seemed to pull at her eyes to suggest patterns her mind refused to complete. Alexander, she called softly, be careful. He glanced back, and the look he gave her was so fierce, so protective that it stole her breath. Then he turned and moved into the ruins. The temple, if that's what it was, had no roof, just massive walls forming a circular chamber perhaps 30 feet across. The smoke they'd seen was coming from the center, where a small fire burned down to coals. And around it, Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry. Bodies. 7 of them, arranged in a circle around the fire with an almost ceremonial precision. They weren't bloody or visibly injured. They simply looked like they were sleeping, their faces peaceful, their hands folded on their chests. But they weren't sleeping. Alexander moved among them, checking for pulses with a methodical efficiency that spoke of military training. After the 3rd body, he stopped, his shoulders sagging. They're dead, he said quietly. All of them. No marks. No signs of violence, just dead. How? Evelyn managed, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I don't know. Alexander stood looking around the chamber with growing unease. But this was deliberate. Someone arranged them like this. Or something, Beckett said from the entrance. He hadn't entered the chamber, Evelyn realized. He stood just outside the stone circle, his face pale, his eyes wide. I told you, the ruins are wrong. People don't just die like this. Not 7 healthy people all at once. Alexander's jaw tightened. There's always an explanation. Maybe they ate something poisonous. Maybe they had injuries we can't see. Maybe you should stop making excuses and accept what's in front of you. Beckett's voice had gone hard. The island wanted them, so it took them. Just like it will take us if we stay here. That's superstitious nonsense, Alexander said flatly. Is it? Beckett gestured to the bodies. Then explain this. Explain the perfect circle. Explain the fact that their fire is still burning after 3 days. Explain why every instinct I have is screaming at me to run. As if in response to his words, a sound echoed through the ruins. Low and resonant, like a bell or a horn, but coming from no visible source. The stones seemed to vibrate with it, and the carvings, those impossible shifting carvings, began to glow faintly, a sickly greenish light that had nothing to do with the sun. Out, Alexander ordered, his voice sharp with command. Now! They didn't need to be told twice. Evelyn turned and ran, Beckett beside her, Alexander at their heels. Behind them the sound grew louder and the light brighter, and the air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against them like something alive and malevolent. They burst out of the ruins and kept running, crashing through the undergrowth, not stopping until they were well into the forest, and the ruins were lost behind the trees. Only then did they stop, gasping, their hearts pounding. What the hell was that? Alexander demanded. I told you, Beckett said, his voice shaking. The ruins are wrong, and now they know we're here. Evelyn looked back toward where the ruins stood hidden by the forest. The sound had stopped, and the unnatural glow had faded, but she could still feel it. A presence, A weight, something ancient and hungry, and utterly inhuman, watching them with interest. "The survivors," she said quietly. "They died in there, but why? What killed them? Does it matter?" Beckett's laugh was bitter. "They're dead and we're alive, and if we're smart, we'll stay as far from those stones as possible." Alexander's expression had gone cold and calculating. "We need to go back. There might be supplies." "Are you insane?" Beckett grabbed his arm. "7 people just died in there, and you want to go back?" "I want answers." Alexander pulled free, his eyes blazing. "I want to know what we're dealing with, because ignorance will kill us just as surely as whatever happened to them. Then you go alone." Beckett stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm done with the ruins. I'm done with mysteries. And I'm done risking my life for dead people." "Beckett," Evelyn started. "No," he cut her off, his voice final. "I've survived here for 3 years by trusting my instincts, and my instincts say that place is death. You want to investigate? You want to solve the island's secrets? You do it without me." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest with the ease of long practice. Evelyn and Alexander stood alone in the clearing, the morning sun bright and cheerful in complete opposition to the horror they'd just witnessed. "He's right," Evelyn said quietly. "Going back would be foolish." "Probably." Alexander's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. "But those people deserve better than being left in that place. They deserve burial, dignity. And if whatever killed them kills us too." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the expression on his face made her heart ache. "Then at least we died trying to do the right thing." God, he was noble, stubborn and infuriating, and absolutely, impossibly noble. "You're not going alone," she said, making the decision even as the words left her mouth. "If you're going back, I'm coming with you." "Evelyn, don't." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of darker grey in his eyes, close enough to feel the tension radiating from him. "Don't try to protect me by leaving me behind. We're in this together, remember? You said it yourself." His hand came up, his fingers catching a strand of hair that had escaped from her braid. He tucked it behind her ear with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about this moment. "You make it impossible to argue with you," he said softly. "Good. Then it's settled." She straightened her shoulders, gathering her courage. "We go back, we bury the dead, we look for supplies, and then we get as far from those ruins as we can manage." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Together," he said. "Together," she echoed. They made their way back to the ruins, moving slowly, every sense alert for danger. The stones stood as they had before, massive and ancient and wrong. But the glow was gone and the sound had faded, and in the bright light of midday, it was almost possible to believe it had been a hallucination. Almost. They found tools among the dead. A small shovel, rope, water flasks that were still miraculously full. Alexander organized their efforts with military precision, and together they dug graves in the soft earth beyond the stone circle. It took hours, back-breaking work under the hot sun, but neither of them complained. Each body they moved revealed more questions. No injuries, no signs of illness. Just 7 people who had simply stopped living, as if their souls had been extinguished like candle flames. "There's a journal," Evelyn said, finding it tucked into one of the dead men's coats. "He was writing right before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Alexander took it from her, opening to the last entry. His expression grew grimmer with each line he read. "The stones are singing," he read aloud. "We can all hear it now, though we heard nothing when we first arrived. Jenkins says it's beautiful. Mary says it's calling her name. I don't know what I think anymore. My thoughts feel soft, like cotton, like I'm drifting. We decided to stay. Why did we decide to stay? I can't remember, but the stones want us here. They're so beautiful when they glow, so peaceful. We should rest. We should all rest, just for a—" Alexander stopped. "That's where it ends." Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. "The stones did it," Evelyn whispered. "Somehow. They called to them, made them want to stay. That's impossible. 7 dead people say otherwise." Alexander closed the journal carefully, his jaw tight. "We finish burying them, and then we leave, and we never, ever come back here." They worked in grim silence until all 7 graves were filled, and marked with simple stones. Alexander spoke a few words over them, not a proper service, but better than nothing. Then they gathered what supplies they could carry and left the ruins behind. The sun was setting by the time they made it back to Beckett's camp. They found him by the fire, his expression wary, his spear close at hand. "You came back," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "We did." Alexander set down his pack. "The dead are buried. The ruins are behind us. And you were right, that place is dangerous beyond understanding." Beckett studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Sit. I'll get food. You both look half dead." As they settled by the fire, Evelyn found herself shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was draining away, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Without thinking, she leaned against Alexander's shoulder, seeking warmth and comfort and the reassurance of another living human being. His arm came around her immediately, pulling her close, and she felt him rest his cheek against the top of her head. "We're alive," he murmured, so softly only she could hear. "We're alive, and we're going to stay that way. I promise you." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting herself believe him. Just for this moment, in the fading light with his warmth surrounding her and his heart beating steady beneath her ear, she let herself believe that promises meant something, that they would survive this island and its horrors, that maybe, against all odds, they would find a way home. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. They fell into a routine at Beckett's camp, hunting, fishing, maintaining the shelter, keeping watch. The work was endless and exhausting, but it kept their minds occupied, kept them from thinking too hard about the ruins, about the 7 dead, about the impossibility of what they'd witnessed. But the ruins haunted Evelyn's dreams anyway. She would wake in the darkness, her heart racing, the echo of that resonant sound still vibrating in her bones. And every time Alexander was there, sometimes already awake, keeping watch, sometimes stirring at the sound of her distress, his hand finding hers in the dark without hesitation. They didn't speak about it, didn't acknowledge the way they'd grown to depend on each other's presence, the way the space between them seemed to shrink with each passing night. There were more important things to worry about: survival, rescue, the growing tension with Beckett that hung over the camp like a storm waiting to break. Because Beckett was changing. It was subtle at first, a sharpness to his words that hadn't been there before. A way of watching them when he thought they weren't looking, his expression calculating and cold. He spent more time alone, disappearing into the forest for hours with no explanation. And when he returned, there was something in his eyes that made Evelyn's skin prickle with unease. "He's planning something," Alexander said quietly one afternoon. They were at the stream, ostensibly washing clothes, but really just stealing a few moments away from Beckett's watchful presence. Evelyn wrung out a shirt, the cold water numbing her fingers. "What makes you say that? The way he's been rationing supplies, he's setting aside more than we need for 3 people. Alexander's jaw tightened. "And last night, when he thought I was asleep, he took inventory of the weapons, counted them, made sure he knew where each one was. Maybe he's just being cautious. Maybe." But Alexander's tone said he didn't believe it. Or maybe he's realized that when rescue comes, if it comes, 3 people are harder to manage than 1. The implication hung between them, ugly and unavoidable. "You think he'd hurt us?" Evelyn's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I think 3 years of isolation has changed him in ways we don't fully understand." Alexander moved closer, his hand finding hers beneath the water. "And I think we need to be prepared for the possibility that our interests and his are no longer aligned." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that had become familiar over the past days. Comforting, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the way her heart skipped when he looked at her. "We could leave," she said quietly, "build our own camp, away from him. And lose his knowledge of the island, his resources." Alexander shook his head. "That's a death sentence. We don't know enough yet to survive on our own." "Then what do we do?" His eyes met hers, grey and storm-dark and completely serious. "We learn, we watch, we prepare, and when the time comes to make a choice—" He paused, his grip tightening on her hand. "We choose each other." The words hit her like a physical blow. Choose each other. Not survival at any cost. Not the cold pragmatism that Beckett preached, but each other. "Alexander," she started, her voice thick with emotions she didn't know how to name. A shout from the direction of camp cut her off. They were on their feet instantly. Alexander already moving, positioning himself between Evelyn and whatever danger might be coming. But it was only Beckett, crashing through the undergrowth with wild eyes and a grin that was all teeth. "Ship," he gasped. "There's a ship on the horizon." Time seemed to stop. "What?" Alexander demanded. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I've been about anything in 3 damned years." Beckett was already turning, running back toward camp. "It's far out, but if we can signal them, if we can get a fire going large enough—" They ran. Camp was chaos as they threw together everything that would burn, dragging it to the highest point they could reach, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the western beach. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and there, silhouetted against the light, was a ship. Small, distant, but undeniably real. "The signal fire," Alexander barked, already striking flint to tinder. "Everything we have now." They piled wood and dried grass and anything else that would create smoke onto the growing flames. The fire caught and spread, hungry and hot, sending a column of black smoke rising into the evening sky. Evelyn found herself praying, actually praying, for the first time since her father's death. "Please, please see us, please." "They're not changing course," Beckett said after several agonizing minutes. His voice had gone flat. "They haven't seen us." "They will," Alexander insisted. "We just need the smoke thicker." More wood. They fed the fire until Evelyn's arms ached and her lungs burned from the smoke. The column rose higher, darker, a beacon against the sunset, but the ship continued on its steady path across the horizon, neither slowing nor turning. "Wave something," Evelyn gasped. "Something light-colored that will catch their eye." Beckett tore off his shirt, already faded and pale, and waved it frantically. Alexander did the same. Evelyn used her shawl, the fabric snapping in the wind. All 3 of them shouted themselves hoarse, knowing the sound would never carry but unable to stop themselves. The ship sailed on. Slowly, inexorably, it moved across their line of sight. And then, as the sun touched the water, it disappeared beyond the curve of the horizon. Gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn sank to her knees, her shawl falling from nerveless fingers. She'd been so certain, so sure that rescue had finally come. The disappointment was a physical pain in her chest, crushing and complete. Beside her, Alexander stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of barely contained emotion. And beyond him, Beckett. Beckett was laughing. It started as a chuckle, low and bitter, then grew until it echoed off the rocks. He bent double with it, gasping, tears streaming down his face. "Stop!" Alexander ordered, his voice dangerous. "Stop laughing." "Why?" Beckett managed between gasps. "It's funny, don't you see? 3 years I've been here, and the very moment someone else shows up, a ship appears, but not close enough, never close enough. It's like the island is mocking us, showing us what we can't have. That's enough." Alexander moved toward him, menacing. "Get control of yourself." "Or what?" Beckett straightened, his laughter cutting off as abruptly as it had started. His eyes were wild, feverish. "Or you'll shoot me with your single-bullet pistol. You'll fight me? Win or lose, what does it matter? We're trapped here forever, just like the others." "What others?" Evelyn asked, finding her voice. Beckett turned to her, and the look on his face made her blood run cold. "Did you really think the ruins were the only place people died? Did you think those 7 were the first?" He gestured wildly at the island around them. "This place is a graveyard. Ships have been wrecking here for centuries, and no one leaves, no one ever leaves." "You don't know that," Alexander said, but there was doubt in his voice now. "Don't I?" Beckett laughed again, shorter this time. "I found evidence, Your Grace. Camps that were abandoned decades ago, bodies that had been there so long they were nothing but bones, journals in languages I couldn't read, but whose final entries all said the same thing: despair, madness, death." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, holding it up to the fading light. A ring, gold and tarnished, but with a crest still visible on its surface. This belonged to a duke, too. Found it in a cave on the southern shore, clutched in the hand of a skeleton wearing the remains of very fine clothes. Beckett's smile was terrible. I wonder if he was as noble as you, if he tried as hard to save everyone, if it made any difference in the end. Alexander took a step back, and Evelyn saw something she'd never seen in him before. Fear, not of Beckett, but of the truth in his words. "The island doesn't want us to leave," Beckett continued, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "It wants us to stay, to become part of it, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop fighting and just let go." "No." Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "No, I don't accept that. I refuse to believe we're meant to die here. Why?" Beckett turned those fever-bright eyes on her. "Because you're special? Because you're a lady and he's a duke, and surely fate wouldn't be so cruel to people of your station?" His laugh was bitter. "The island doesn't care about titles. It doesn't care about nobility or courage or love. It just takes what it wants." "Then let it try." Alexander's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Let it try to take us, because I won't go quietly. So I won't give up, and I sure as hell won't let it have her." The last words were directed at Beckett, but his eyes found Evelyn's as he said them, and in that look was everything, protection and possession, and something deeper that made her breath catch. Beckett studied them both for a long moment. Then he shook his head, something like pity in his expression. "Then you'll die fighting," he said quietly, "and I'll bury you next to all the others who thought they were different, who thought they could beat the island through sheer force of will." He turned and walked away, disappearing down the path toward camp, leaving them alone on the outcropping with the dying fire and the empty horizon. Evelyn felt Alexander's arm come around her, pulling her close. She went willingly, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of smoke and salt and him. His heart thundered beneath her ear, too fast, betraying the calm he was trying to project. "He's wrong," Alexander murmured into her hair. "He has to be wrong. And if he's not—" Evelyn pulled back just enough to look up at him. "If the island really is what he says it is." Alexander's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Then we have each other, for however long we have, and that has to be enough. Alexander." His name came out as barely more than a breath. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Couldn't. She'd been half in love with him since the moment he'd pulled her from the water, and fully in love since the night he'd held her hand in the darkness and promised her they'd survive together. His lips touched hers, soft and careful, a question more than a demand. And she answered by rising on her toes, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and suddenly gentle wasn't enough. Alexander's arm tightened around her waist, lifting her against him, and she opened to him without reservation. He tasted like smoke and desperation and hope, terrible, beautiful hope that they might have something worth saving. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the stars had come out overhead. The fire had burned down to coals, and the world had narrowed to just the two of them, clinging to each other on the edge of darkness. "I should apologize," Alexander said roughly, his forehead resting against hers. "Don't you dare." Evelyn's fingers traced the strong line of his jaw, the scrape of stubble rough against her skin. "Don't you dare apologize for the first good thing that's happened since we ended up in this nightmare." His laugh was short and surprised. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" "I'm terrified." The admission cost her, but she owed him honesty. "I'm terrified that Beckett is right. That we'll never leave here. That we'll end up like those 7 in the ruins, or the Duke in the cave, or all the others he found. I'm terrified that I'll lose you before I've even had a chance to—" She stopped, the words too big and too frightening to say aloud. But Alexander heard them anyway. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his expression softened into something that made her heart ache. "You won't lose me," he promised. "Not to the island, not to madness, not to anything. We're going to survive this, Evelyn. And when we do, when we get back to London, I'm going to court you properly, with flowers and carefully chaperoned visits and all the ridiculous rules society demands." Despite everything, she found herself smiling. "That sounds terrible." "It does, doesn't it?" He smiled back, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "But I'll endure it. For you. For me. she repeated softly, the words a vow. They stood there as the night deepened, neither wanting to return to camp and the uncomfortable reality of Beckett's presence. But eventually the cold drove them down, and they made their way back through the darkened forest. They found Beckett sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife with methodical, precise strokes. He looked up as they approached, and something flickered in his expression, something that might have been resignation, or acceptance, or loss. "I'm leaving in the morning," he said without preamble. "Heading to the southern caves. There's better fishing there, and I've spent too long with people. I need solitude." "Beckett," Evelyn started, but he cut her off. "This isn't punishment or abandonment. You've learned enough to survive without me. You have supplies, weapons, knowledge of the island." His eyes moved between them, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And you have each other, which I'm beginning to think might be worth more than all the survival skills in the world." Alexander's hand found Evelyn's, their fingers intertwining. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do." Beckett set down his knife, his expression weary. 3 years alone broke something in me, and watching you two, it reminds me of what I lost, of the man I was before this island got its hooks into me. Better I leave before I become the thing that destroys what you're building." "You think you'd hurt us?" Evelyn asked quietly. Beckett's smile was sad. "I think I'm capable of things I never imagined. I think the island whispers suggestions when you're alone long enough. And I think, if a choice came down to your survival or mine—" He shook his head. "I'd rather not find out what I'd choose." The honesty of it struck Evelyn silent. "I'll leave you most of the supplies," Beckett continued. "Keep the pistol. You'll need it more than I will. And if you see another ship, if you somehow manage to signal rescue—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Send someone back for me, if you can, if you remember." "We'll remember," Alexander said firmly, "and we'll send help. I give you my word." "The word of a duke." Beckett's laugh was soft and almost fond. "Once upon a time, that would have meant something to me. Maybe it still does." He stood, extending his hand. Alexander took it without hesitation, and they shook. Two men who'd been enemies and allies and something in between, acknowledging that survival sometimes meant walking away. Then Beckett turned to Evelyn, and his expression gentled. "Take care of him. He's too noble for his own good. It'll get him killed if someone doesn't watch his back." "I will," she promised. "And you," he said to Alexander, "take care of her. She's stronger than she looks, but strength has limits. Don't let the island find hers." "Never," Alexander vowed. Beckett nodded once, then moved to his sleeping area to gather his things. Within the hour, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness with nothing but a spear and a pack, and 3 years of hard-won knowledge. Evelyn and Alexander stood at the edge of camp, watching the forest swallow him whole. "Do you think he'll be all right?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know." Alexander's arm came around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "But I think he needed to go. Needed to find whatever peace this island will allow him." They returned to the fire, banking it for the night, moving through the familiar routine of preparing for sleep. But everything felt different now. The camp was theirs. The island was theirs. And the future, terrifying and uncertain and impossible, was theirs to face together. When they settled into the shelter, there was no pretense of distance. Evelyn curled against Alexander's side, her head on his chest, his arm secure around her. And for the first time since the shipwreck, she felt something close to safe. "Tell me something," she murmured into the darkness. "Something from before. Something good." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his fingers playing idly with her hair. "My brother," he said finally. "James. He was 3 years younger than me and absolutely fearless. When we were boys, he convinced me to steal our father's best horses and race them across the estate. We nearly killed ourselves, and the horses, but God, it was glorious." Evelyn smiled, imagining it. "What happened to him?" "Waterloo. He was a lieutenant, led a cavalry charge against French artillery." Alexander's voice had gone rough. "They said he died instantly. I hope that's true. I hope he didn't suffer. I'm sorry." "So am I." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "He would have liked you, would have said I was too serious and you were exactly what I needed." Was he right? "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "God help me, yes." Evelyn tilted her head back, finding his face in the darkness. I was wrong about you, you know. When we first met, I thought you were cold, heartless, but you're not. You're just careful, guarded, like you're afraid if you let people see the real you, they'll use it against you." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "And you're too brave for your own good, too reckless, like you're trying to prove you're not the delicate lady everyone expects you to be." "Maybe I am. Then we're both playing roles." He leaned down, his breath warm against her mouth, but not with each other, not anymore. The kiss was different this time, slower, deeper, full of promise and longing and all the things they couldn't say aloud. When they finally broke apart, Evelyn's heart was racing and her skin felt too hot despite the cool night air. "We should sleep," Alexander murmured, but made no move to pull away. "We should," Evelyn agreed, but her fingers traced patterns on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. They lay tangled together in the darkness, neither quite sleeping, neither quite awake, aware of each other in every breath, every shift, every moment. And outside the island whispered through the trees, watching, waiting, hungry. The days after Beckett's departure blurred together in a rhythm of survival and discovery. Without his presence, the camp felt both emptier and more intimate. Evelyn and Alexander worked side by side, learning through trial and error what Beckett had tried to teach them. They caught fish in nets woven from stripped vines. They foraged for edible plants, making mistakes that left them sick, but wiser. They reinforced the shelter against the afternoon rains that came with increasing frequency. And through it all, they grew closer. Not just in proximity, though there was that too, the way their hands would brush while working, the way they'd sit near enough that their shoulders touched by the fire, the way they'd fall asleep tangled together each night as if afraid to let go. But something deeper, a knowing that came from seeing each other at their worst and choosing to stay anyway. Evelyn learned that Alexander talked in his sleep, muttering orders to men long dead, calling his brother's name with a desperation that broke her heart. She learned that he was methodical to a fault, checking and rechecking their supplies each morning as if the count might have changed overnight. She learned that when he smiled, truly smiled, not the cold mask he'd worn in London, his entire face transformed into something beautiful. Alexander learned that Evelyn sang while she worked, quiet melodies her father had taught her, her voice clear and sweet in the forest silence. He learned that she was stubborn beyond reason, refusing to quit even when her hands bled from weaving nets or her legs trembled from climbing for fruit. He learned that when she was frightened, she went very still and very quiet, as if making herself small might protect her from whatever threatened. And they learned that the island was watching them always. It was subtle at first, sounds that shouldn't be there, whispers when the wind was still, footsteps that had no source, shadows that moved wrong, slipping between trees with impossible speed. The feeling of being observed, constant and oppressive, raising the hair on the back of their necks. "Do you feel it?" Evelyn asked one afternoon as they worked to expand their food stores. They were smoking fish over a low fire, a technique Alexander had finally mastered after several charred attempts. "The watching?" He didn't look up from the fish he was turning. "Yes, every moment. It's getting stronger." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat, like the island is, I don't know, waiting for something. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Beckett said the island wants us to stay. Maybe it's testing us, seeing if we'll break like the others did. And if we don't break, then we survive." He finally looked at her and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "We survive, and we get off this island, and we live. Together. That's not negotiable." The certainty in his voice should have reassured her, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the island had other plans. That night, the dreams came. Evelyn found herself standing in the ruins, though she knew she was asleep, knew this couldn't be real. The stones glowed with that same sickly green light, and the carvings moved, actually moved, writhing across the surface like living things. And the voice. Oh God, the voice. It spoke directly into her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. The language was nothing she recognized, but somehow she understood it anyway. It promised things, beautiful things, peace, rest, an end to struggle and fear, and the constant exhausting work of survival. All she had to do was stay. All she had to do was stop fighting. All she had to do was let go. "No," she heard herself say, though her lips didn't move. "No, I won't." The voice grew angry then, the ruins shaking, the light flaring brighter. It showed her images. Alexander dead, his body broken on the rocks. Herself alone, starving, going mad with isolation. The two of them fighting, turning on each other like animals, destroying the thing they'd built in blood and desperation. "None of that is real," she insisted, though terror clawed at her throat. "You're trying to break me, but I won't let you." The ruins exploded outward, stone fragments flying, and she was falling, falling, falling. She woke with a gasp, her body rigid with fear. Strong arms immediately surrounded her, and Alexander's voice cut through the panic. "I'm here. You're safe. I have you." Evelyn clung to him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The ruins. I was there. It spoke to me." "I know." His hand stroked her hair, soothing. "I heard you talking in your sleep, arguing with something. It wanted me to give up, to stay here forever." She pulled back enough to see his face in the darkness. "Alexander, what if it can do more than just whisper? What if it can make us see things, feel things? What if it can turn us against each other?" His expression went grim. "Then we don't let it. We trust what's real. What we know is real. Each other. How do we know what's real anymore?" He took her hand and pressed it against his chest over his heart. "This, my heartbeat. The way you make me feel. Terrified and hopeful and more alive than I've been in years. That's real, Evelyn. Whatever the island does, whatever it shows us, that truth doesn't change." Tears pricked her eyes. "Promise me something. Anything. If I start to change, if the island gets into my head and I can't tell what's real, promise you'll bring me back. No matter what it takes." His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I promise. And you make me the same promise." "I do." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. "I promise." They didn't sleep again that night. Instead, they talked, sharing memories and stories and pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone, building walls of truth against the island's lies. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Alexander spoke the words that had been building between them for days. "I love you." Simple. Devastating. True. Evelyn's breath caught. "Alexander, you don't have to say it back." His voice was rough but steady. "I just needed you to know, whatever happens, whatever the island does, I need you to know that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, even here, even now, especially now. You stubborn, impossible man." She laughed through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Of course I love you. I've loved you since you pulled me from the water, since you built that first fire, since you held my hand in the darkness and made me believe we could survive." He kissed her then, and it was different from the others, slower, deeper, full of promises and declarations that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the future they were determined to have. When they finally broke apart, the sun was fully up, and the forest had come alive with morning sounds. But underneath it all, Evelyn could still feel the island's presence, still feel it watching, waiting, planning. The attack came 3 days later. They were at the stream, refilling water skins and washing clothes, mundane tasks that had become precious in their routine. The day was hot and clear, insects humming in the afternoon heat, everything peaceful and normal. Then the air pressure changed. Evelyn felt it first, a sudden drop that made her ears pop and her skin prickle. She looked up to find Alexander already on his feet, his expression alert, one hand on the knife at his belt. "What?" she started, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Listen." The forest had gone silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just an oppressive quiet that pressed against them like something physical. And then the wind began. It came from nowhere, from everywhere, howling through the trees with unnatural force. Branches cracked and fell around them. Leaves whipped through the air like knives. The stream, so calm moments before, began to churn and froth as if something thrashed beneath its surface. "The shelter!" Alexander shouted over the roar. "We need to get to—" The ground beneath them lurched. Not an earthquake. Evelyn had felt earthquakes before, in Italy during her grand tour. This was different, deliberate, as if the island itself was shrugging them off like an unwanted pest. She stumbled, and Alexander caught her, his arm an iron band around her waist. They ran, fighting against wind that seemed determined to push them back, dodging falling branches and flying debris. The camp was in chaos when they reached it. Their carefully organized supplies were scattered across the clearing. The fire pit had been torn apart, hot coals spread dangerously close to the shelter, and the shelter itself was listing badly, half collapsed. The framework they'd spent days building destroyed in moments. "No!" Evelyn's cry was torn away by the wind. Alexander pulled her to the ground, covering her body with his, as a massive branch crashed down exactly where they'd been standing. His weight pressed her into the earth, solid and protective, his heart pounding against her back. "We can't stay here," he shouted directly into her ear. "The whole structure is coming down. Where do we go?" Good question. The wind was too strong to head for the beach. The forest was raining branches, and the ruins, no, never the ruins. "The caves!" Alexander hauled her to her feet, keeping himself between her and the worst of the wind. Beckett mentioned caves on the western cliffs. They should provide shelter. They gathered what they could, the pistol, some food, water skins, blankets. Then they abandoned everything else and ran. The forest tried to stop them. Trees fell across their path with suspicious timing. Vines seemed to reach out and grab at their ankles. Roots rose up to trip them. But Alexander moved with military precision, choosing paths that avoided the worst of it, his hand locked on hers like a lifeline. They burst out of the trees onto the western cliffs just as the rain began, not a gentle shower, but a deluge that drenched them instantly and made the rocks treacherous. Below them, waves as tall as buildings crashed against the shore, sending spray 50 feet into the air. "There!" Evelyn spotted it, a dark opening in the cliff face, partially hidden by an outcropping. "There's a cave!" They scrambled across the slick rocks, every step a calculated risk. Twice Evelyn nearly fell, and twice Alexander's grip saved her. Once he slipped, and she braced herself against a boulder to hold his weight until he found purchase again. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, but inside it opened into a larger chamber. Not spacious, but dry and protected from the storm's fury. They collapsed just inside, gasping, soaked to the skin, adrenaline making them shake. Outside the storm raged. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the stone beneath them. Lightning painted the world in stark flashes of white. And underneath it all, Evelyn could swear she heard it, that same resonant sound from the ruins, deep and ominous and wrong. "The island," she gasped, still trying to catch her breath. "It did this. This isn't a natural storm." "I know." Alexander was checking their supplies with hands that trembled slightly. "It's trying to drive us somewhere, or kill us. I'm not sure which. Both, maybe." Evelyn wrapped one of the salvaged blankets around her shoulders. "We can't keep running, Alexander. Eventually we'll run out of places to hide. Then we stop running." He moved to sit beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We make a stand. We find a way to fight back." "How do you fight an island?" "I don't know yet." His jaw was set in that determined line she'd come to know so well. "But there has to be a way. The ruins, there's something there. Something important. Why else would the island guard them so carefully?" Evelyn's blood ran cold. "You want to go back there?" "Not want, need." He turned to face her and his eyes were fierce. "Think about it. The survivors died there, but only after they stayed for days. The stones spoke to them, made them want to stay. That's power, Evelyn. Real, tangible power. And if the island can use it, maybe we can too. That's insane." "Probably." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But what part of this situation isn't?" She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him it was suicide to go back to that cursed place. But a larger part of her, the part that had spent 3 weeks watching him refuse to give up, refuse to break, refuse to let the island win, knew he was right. The storm continued through the night, rain hammering the rocks with relentless fury. They huddled together in the cave, sharing warmth and what little food they had. Alexander kept watch at the entrance, the pistol in his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats that might be real or imagined. Evelyn tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ruins, heard that voice promising peace if she'd just surrender, felt the pull of it seductive and terrible. "Tell me about London," she said quietly, needing something, anything, to anchor her to reality. "Tell me what we'll do when we get back." Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then, "First, I'll take you to my estate in the country. Not the formal one, the small property in Kent that was my mother's. There's a garden there, roses and lavender, and a fountain that my brother and I used to sail toy boats in. It sounds beautiful. It is, peaceful, the kind of place where you can hear yourself think." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I'll show you the library. 2 stories of books that my grandfather collected. And the music room where my mother used to play piano. And the trails through the woods where James and I used to hunt." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting his words paint pictures. "And then? Then I'll court you properly. Call on you with your aunt as chaperone, assuming your uncle hasn't completely disowned you for the scandal of being stranded with a man. He probably has," she laughed softly. "I'm thoroughly ruined by society's standards. Then I'll marry you immediately and make you a duchess. Save your reputation through scandal rather than propriety." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Would you mind that? Being married to me?" "Mind?" She shifted to look at him, though she could barely see his face in the darkness. "Alexander, it's all I want. You're all I want." He kissed her then, and despite everything, the storm, the danger, the island's malevolence, for that moment, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. His mouth moved against hers with a desperation that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hope. Hope that they'd survive. Hope that they'd have a future. Hope that love could be stronger than whatever darkness threatened them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to make it," he whispered. "I swear to you, Evelyn, we're going to make it home." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But outside the storm howled, and underneath it all the island laughed. Morning came grey and sullen, the storm reduced to a persistent drizzle. They emerged from the cave to find the forest transformed. Trees that had stood for centuries were toppled like matchsticks. The stream had overflowed its banks, turning low-lying areas into mud pits, and their camp, when they finally made their way back, was completely destroyed. Everything they'd built, every supply they'd carefully gathered was gone, scattered or buried or simply erased, as if it had never existed at all. Evelyn stood in the center of the destruction, feeling something inside her crack. 3 weeks, she said quietly. 3 weeks of work, gone in one night. Alexander's hand gripped her shoulder. "Then we rebuild. We start over. No." She turned to face him, and something in her expression made him stop. "No more running, no more hiding. You were right last night. We have to go back to the ruins. We have to find out what they are, what they want, and how to use it against the island. Evelyn, don't." She cut him off, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Don't try to protect me by leaving me behind. Don't try to be noble and go alone. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The need to keep her safe, fighting against the knowledge that she was right, that separation would doom them both. Finally, he nodded. "Together, then. But we do it smart. We prepare. We learn everything we can before we set foot in that place again." Agreed. They spent the day salvaging what they could and preparing for what came next. Alexander checked and rechecked the pistol, making sure the powder was still dry, the mechanism still functional. Evelyn gathered plants she'd learned had protective properties, probably useless against whatever supernatural force guarded the ruins, but it made her feel like she was doing something. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they stood at the forest's edge, looking toward the northeast, where the ruins waited. "Last chance to change your mind," Alexander said quietly. Evelyn took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Not a chance. Then let's go face whatever the island has in store." Together they walked into the forest, toward the ruins and the answers they contained, neither knowing if they would return, but knowing at least that they wouldn't die alone. The ruins looked different at dusk. The stones seemed to absorb the fading light rather than reflect it, creating pools of shadow that were too dark, too deep. The carvings had changed, or perhaps Evelyn's perception of them had changed, and now she could almost read them, almost understand the patterns that writhed across the ancient surface. Almost. "We stay together," Alexander said, his voice low and tense. The pistol was in his hand, though they both knew it would be useless against whatever they faced here. No matter what we see or hear, we don't separate. Understood? Understood. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the knife Beckett had given her. The blade felt small and inadequate, but its weight was reassuring. They entered the stone circle as the last light bled from the sky. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world changed. The sounds of the forest, already muted, vanished completely. The air grew thick, pressing against them like something tangible, and the stones began to hum, a low vibration that Evelyn felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "Yes." Alexander's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the ruins with military alertness. "Stay close to me." They moved deeper into the circle, toward the central chamber where the 7 survivors had died. The graves they'd dug were still there, undisturbed, the stones they'd used as markers exactly where they'd placed them. But in the center where the fire pit had been, something new waited. A stone altar that Evelyn would swear hadn't been there before. Smooth black rock, waist-high with more of those impossible carvings covering every surface. And on its center, as if placed deliberately for them to find, lay a book. Not a journal or a sailor's log, but something older. The leather binding was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile, and when Alexander reached for it, his hand trembling slightly, the moment his fingers touched the cover, light exploded through the ruins. Not the sickly green glow from before, but pure white brilliance that seared itself into Evelyn's vision. She cried out, throwing up her arm to shield her eyes, and felt Alexander's hand grip hers with bruising force. And then the voice came. Not the seductive whisper from her dreams, but something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. It spoke directly into their minds, bypassing language entirely, pouring knowledge and memory and terrible understanding into them like water into vessels too small to contain it. Evelyn saw the island's history unfold in flashes. A civilization thousands of years ago, building the ruins as a temple to something they worshipped and feared in equal measure. A gateway between worlds, between life and death, between what was and what could be. Rituals performed under blood moons, sacrifices made willingly by those who believed it would grant them immortality. And it worked, after a fashion. Their consciousness bound to the island itself, preserved but twisted, hungry for the warmth and life and humanity they'd surrendered. Ships drawn here over centuries, by currents that shouldn't exist. Survivors who thought they'd found refuge, only to discover they'd found a prison. The island feeding on their hope, their fear, their desperate will to survive, growing stronger with each soul that broke beneath its weight. And at the center of it all, the choice. The same choice offered to every castaway who'd ever set foot on this cursed shore. Surrender your humanity and live forever as part of the island, or cling to what you are and eventually die, your essence feeding the ancient consciousness that slumbered in the stones. The vision stopped as abruptly as they'd begun, and Evelyn found herself on her knees gasping, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Alexander was in the same position, his expression devastated, his hand still locked on hers like an anchor to reality. "Dear God," he breathed, "they weren't lying, any of them. The island really is, it's alive. It's been alive for millennia. And it wants us." Evelyn's voice shook. "It's been testing us, breaking down our defenses, waiting for us to be desperate enough to accept its offer." Alexander pushed himself to his feet, pulling her up with him. His face was pale but determined, that stubborn set to his jaw that she loved and feared in equal measure. "Then we refuse," he said. "We refuse its offer and we find another way." The ruins shuddered, and that vast presence pressed down on them with crushing weight. The stones began to glow again, brighter and brighter, and the humming grew to a roar that threatened to split their skulls. "There is no other way." The words weren't spoken, but felt, reverberating through every cell of their bodies. "You will choose. All who come here choose. Surrender or starve, submit or suffer, become part of us or become nothing." "No!" Evelyn shouted into the maelstrom of light and sound. "There's always another way, we'll find it. Will you?" And suddenly the light coalesced, taking shape before them. Not a physical form, but an impression of presence, something vast and hungry and infinitely patient, regarding them with interest that was almost clinical. "Your love so bright, so rare, so delicious. The words dripped with sick satisfaction, and Evelyn felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers to the point of pain. "We have watched you, tested you, the storm, the ruins, the despair, everything designed to break you apart, but you remain together. Fascinating." "Get out of my head," Alexander growled, raising the pistol, though both of them knew it was useless. "Get out, or I'll—" "You'll what? Shoot us? We are the island. We are the stones and the trees and the very ground beneath your feet. You cannot kill us. You cannot escape us. You can only choose." The presence shifted, and suddenly Evelyn could see it. Really see it. Not one consciousness, but hundreds, thousands, all the souls that had surrendered to the island over the centuries. Their individuality eroded until they were nothing but hunger and malice and the hollow echo of what they'd once been. "Look upon us and see your future. Join us and your love will last forever. Refuse and it will die with your bodies. Which do you choose?" Evelyn looked at Alexander and saw her own horror reflected in his eyes. This was the trap. Not death, but immortality without humanity. An eternity of existence but not life, bound to this place, feeding on future castaways the way these ancient souls fed on them now. "No," she said quietly. "Neither. We choose neither. There is no third option. Then we make one." Alexander's voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. "You say we can't escape. You say we can't kill you. But you're here, bargaining with us, which means you want something. Which means you're not as all-powerful as you pretend." The presence recoiled slightly, and for the first time Evelyn felt something from it that might have been uncertainty. "Careful, Duke. Your arrogance isn't arrogance if it's true." Alexander pulled Evelyn closer, his arm around her waist, his body positioned protectively between her and the presence. "You feed on souls, on consciousness, on the life force of those who die here. But we're still alive, still fighting. Which means you haven't won yet. Which means there's a way out you're not telling us about." Silence, oppressive and heavy and charged with malevolence. Then, "Clever, too clever. Perhaps we should have broken you when we had the chance. Too late now." Alexander's smile was cold and sharp. "Tell us how to leave, or we'll find a way to hurt you. I don't know how yet, but I will. That's a promise." "You would threaten us?" "I would burn this entire island to bedrock if it meant protecting her." His voice dropped to something deadly. "Test me, please." The presence seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, the crushing weight eased. The light dimmed. And when the voice came again, it was different, less certain, less monstrous, almost regretful. "There is a way. There has always been a way, but no one has ever been strong enough to take it." "Tell us," Evelyn demanded, finding her voice. "The book, the one on the altar. It contains the ritual that created us, and within it the means to unmake what was made." Alexander moved to the altar, Evelyn at his side, and carefully opened the ancient tome. The pages were covered in symbols similar to those on the stones, but as they looked, the meaning became clear, as if the island itself was translating for them. A ritual, complex and demanding and terribly dangerous. "Blood from those who resist," Evelyn read aloud, her voice shaking. "Offered freely at the place of power, spoken words to sever the binding between stone and soul. And a sacrifice," the presence added, and now there was something like satisfaction in its tone. "Always a sacrifice. One life given willingly to break the chains of thousands." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "No, it is the only way. One of you must stay, must give yourself to the island completely, and in dying your soul, pure and uncorrupted, will shatter the binding. The others will be free. The island will lose its power." "And the one who stays?" Alexander asked quietly. "Will cease to be, not joining us, not immortal, simply gone, erased. The price of freedom for all others." Evelyn and Alexander looked at each other, and she saw the decision forming in his eyes even before he spoke. "No," she said firmly, "absolutely not. Evelyn, don't you dare." Her voice cracked. "Don't you dare try to be noble and sacrifice yourself. I won't allow it. And I won't allow you to do it either." His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite the desperation in his eyes. "Which means we find another way. There has to be another way. There is not. One must die. That is the price. That has always been the price. Then we both stay, Evelyn said, the decision forming as she spoke it. Neither of us leaves. We refuse your bargain entirely. Then you both die, slowly, painfully, and your souls become ours anyway. Is that truly preferable? Alexander's jaw was set in that stubborn line, and Evelyn knew, absolutely knew, that he was calculating, planning, trying to find a way to trick her into leaving while he stayed behind. She couldn't allow that. The ritual says blood offered freely, she said, an idea forming. It doesn't specify how much blood, or from how many people. Alexander's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? What if the sacrifice isn't death? What if it's the willingness to die? She turned to face the presence, her heart pounding. You said the ritual requires blood given freely at the place of power and a willing sacrifice. But what if we both offer our blood, both declare our willingness to die for the other? Would that be enough? The presence was silent for a long moment. Then, it has never been attempted. The ritual was designed for one sacrifice, not two. The magic might not what? Alexander pressed. Might not work, or might work too well. We do not know. For the first time since they'd entered the ruins, Evelyn felt something like hope. Then we try it, she said. Both of us, together. And if it kills us, at least we die breaking your power. At least we die free. Evelyn, wait. Alexander started, but she cut him off. No more arguing. No more noble sacrifices. We started this together, and we end it together. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Whatever happens next, it happens to both of us. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw everything in his eyes. Fear and love and desperate hope, and the knowledge that she was right, that this was the only way. Together, he finally said. Together, she echoed. They turned to the altar, to the ancient book with its terrible ritual, and began to read. The words were complex, the pronunciation challenging, but the island helped, grudgingly, as if compelled by the magic of its own making. They learned the phrases, practiced them until they could speak them without hesitation. Then Alexander took his knife and drew it across his palm. Blood welled up, dark and vivid against his skin. He held his hand over the altar, letting drops fall onto the black stone. I offer this freely, he said, his voice steady. My blood, my life, my soul, for her, for everyone trapped here, for freedom. The stones began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Evelyn took her own knife with hands that shook and made the same cut. The pain was sharp but distant, less important than what came next. She held her bleeding palm over the altar beside Alexander's. I offer this freely, she said, her voice clear despite her fear. My blood, my life, my soul, for him, for everyone trapped here, for freedom. The glow intensified and the humming grew to a roar. Their blood mixed on the altar, running together, and where it touched, the stone began to crack. Now, the presence commanded, and there was something in its tone, not quite fear but close. Speak the words, complete the ritual. Together, their voices joining, they spoke the ancient phrases. The language felt wrong in their mouths, harsh and angular, but the power in it was undeniable. With each syllable, the cracks in the stone spread wider. With each word, the glow grew brighter. And with the final phrase, everything exploded. Light and sound and power, all detonating outward from the altar in a wave that threw them backward. Evelyn felt herself lifted, flying through the air, Alexander's hand still locked on hers. They hit the ground hard, pain flaring, but neither let go. The ruins were screaming, or the consciousness within them was. The stones shook and cracked, pieces falling away. The carvings blazed with light so bright it was blinding, and beneath it all, Evelyn could hear thousands of voices crying out, not in pain but in release, in freedom. The souls trapped in the island for millennia, finally set free. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The light faded. The sound ceased. The ruins stood silent and still, just stones now, ancient and mysterious, but no longer malevolent, no longer alive. Evelyn lay on the ground, gasping, her entire body aching. Beside her, Alexander stirred, groaning, his hand still holding hers. Did it work? She managed. I don't know. He pushed himself up on one elbow, wincing. The presence. It's gone. I can't feel it anymore. He was right. The oppressive weight that had pressed on them since entering the ruins, since arriving on the island, was absent. The air felt lighter, normal, just air, nothing more. We did it, Evelyn breathed. Oh my God, Alexander, we did it. He pulled her up and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't care. She clung to him just as fiercely, her face buried in his chest, tears streaming down her face. I thought we were going to die, she sobbed. I know. He was shaking too, she realized. This impossible, stoic man was trembling in her arms. But we didn't. We're alive. We're free. They held each other as the night deepened around them, neither willing to let go, both needing the reassurance of touch and warmth and the steady beat of another heart. Eventually, Alexander pulled back just enough to look at her face. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. Marry me, he said. Evelyn laughed, actually laughed, the sound coming out slightly hysterical, but genuine. You already asked me that. In a cave, remember? I'm asking again. Here, now. With the island's curse broken and our future ahead of us. His eyes were serious, intense in the moonlight. Marry me, Evelyn. Make me the happiest man alive. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you. You stubborn, impossible, wonderful man. She pulled him down and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, love and relief and hope and promise. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed until the moon rose high overhead, until the stars came out in numbers Evelyn had never seen before, until the forest came alive with sounds that were natural and beautiful and no longer threatening. Finally, exhausted and happy and free, they made their way back through the forest toward their destroyed camp. They would rebuild, they would survive, and eventually rescue would come, because the island's power to draw ships here, to trap and torment, was broken now. As they walked hand in hand through the moonlit forest, Evelyn felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the shipwreck. Peace. 6 weeks later, a ship appeared on the horizon. This time, it saw their signal fire. This time, it changed course. And this time, when the longboat launched from its side, Alexander and Evelyn stood on the beach, holding hands, ready to finally go home. The sailors who came ashore found them tanned and lean and different from the aristocrats who'd boarded a merchant vessel 3 months before. But alive. Against all odds. Impossibly. Miraculously alive. How did you survive? The ship's captain asked as they were rowed back to his vessel. 3 months on an uncharted island with no supplies, no shelter. It's impossible. Alexander and Evelyn exchanged a look. We had each other, Alexander said simply. That was enough. The captain didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't press. Perhaps he saw something in their eyes, some shadow of what they'd faced, that made him reluctant to know more. As the ship pulled away from the island, Evelyn stood at the rail, watching it recede into the distance. The ruins were invisible from here, but she knew they were there. Just stones now. Ancient and mysterious, but no longer dangerous, no longer hungry. Do you think Beckett made it? She asked quietly. Alexander's arm came around her waist. I don't know. But when we get to London, I'll send an expedition. Well supplied, well armed, with orders to search every inch of that island. If he's alive, we'll find him. That's a promise. And if he's not? Then we make sure his sacrifice, his choice to leave so we could survive, means something. His voice was firm. We live. We live well. We make our future everything we dreamed it could be. Evelyn leaned into him, watching the island disappear beyond the horizon. Tell me again, what happens when we get home? Alexander's lips curved into that smile she loved. The real one, the one that transformed his face. I take you to Kent, show you the garden with the roses, the library with the 1,000 books, the music room where we'll have our first dance as husband and wife. We're not married yet. Details. His arm tightened around her. I'll get a special license the moment we dock. We'll be married within a week. Scandal and propriety be damned. Your reputation is nothing compared to making sure you're mine in every way that matters. He turned her to face him, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. I've faced death with you, I've broken an ancient curse with you. I'll face London society with you, and I promise that will be significantly less frightening. Evelyn laughed, the sound light and genuine. I love you. I love you too. He kissed her, gentle and sweet, the promise of forever in the touch of his lips against hers. My Evelyn, my love, my Duchess. Not a Duchess yet. Soon. The ship sailed on, carrying them away from nightmare and toward hope. Behind them, the island grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a dark smudge on the horizon. And then, finally, nothing at all. Just empty ocean and open sky and the future stretching endlessly before them. 1 year later, Kent, England. The garden was in full bloom, roses climbing the walls of the estate in shades of cream and pink and deep crimson. Evelyn sat on a stone bench near the fountain, her hand resting on the barely visible swell of her stomach, watching Alexander play with the young boy they'd found in the expedition to the island, Beckett's son. They'd found Thomas Beckett in a cave on the southern shore, exactly where he'd said he'd be. Alive but barely, half-starved and feverish, clutching a journal filled with increasingly desperate entries, and beside him, a revelation. A child, perhaps 5 years old, the son of a woman who'd been stranded with him years before. The woman hadn't survived, but the boy had, and Beckett had kept him alive through sheer force of will. They'd brought them both home. Beckett was recovering, slowly, painfully, his mind scarred by isolation, but healing in the safety of Alexander's estate. And the boy, Charlie, was thriving under their care. "Higher!" Charlie shrieked, as Alexander tossed him into the air and caught him safely. "Higher, Uncle Alex." "Any higher and you'll fly away," Alexander laughed, but he tossed him again anyway, the boy's delighted squeals echoing through the garden. Evelyn smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. Their child would be born in winter, a baby conceived not in desperation, but in love, in the peace they'd fought so hard to claim. "You look happy." She glanced up to find Beckett standing nearby, leaning on a cane, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "I am," she said simply. "Are you?" He considered the question seriously. "I'm healing, learning to be human again, learning to be a father." His eyes moved to Charlie, and something tender crossed his face. "You saved us, both of us. I never thanked you properly for that. You would have done the same. Maybe." He sat down beside her carefully, his movements still stiff from months of malnourishment. "The island, you really broke its power? Destroyed what lived there?" "We did." Evelyn looked toward the horizon, toward the distant ocean she could feel but not see. "It's just an island now, no curses, no malevolence, just stone and trees and sand." "Good." His voice was fierce. "Good. Let it fade into obscurity. Let it be forgotten. Let the dead finally rest." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Alexander play with Charlie, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. And Evelyn thought about journeys, how they changed you, broke you, remade you into something stronger than you were before. She'd left London a girl running from an arranged marriage. She'd returned a woman who'd faced ancient evil and won, who'd found love in the last place she'd expected, who'd learned that sometimes survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant choosing again and again to be human, to love, to hope. "Evelyn," Alexander called, Charlie perched on his shoulders. "Come play with us." She stood, smiling, her hand leaving her stomach to wave at her husband and the child who would soon be joined by their own. "Coming." As she walked across the garden toward her family, the roses swaying gently in the breeze, Evelyn sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For survival, for love, for second chances, for choosing each other always and forever in darkness and in light. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, locations, and situations portrayed in this video are entirely fictional and created solely for storytelling and entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, actual events, places, or historical situations is purely coincidental. This content is intended for a mature audience and contains elements of drama, emotional tension, survival themes, and romantic storytelling. There is no intent to promote violence, harmful behavior, superstition, or misinformation. The narrative is presented as a fictional cinematic story, not as historical fact, documentary, or real-life account. All music used in this video is original or properly licensed, and all images and visuals are either AI-generated, royalty-free, or used with appropriate rights. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for watching and supporting original storytelling.
You held my hand and said my name, and the fear was never the same. When the world tried to break us, we chose to stay. When the storm tried to take us,